Chapter 1728, Severing Mundane Pool. This young man was incredibly arrogant. However, he indeed had the right to be arrogant. After all, he had already become a First Severance Grand Elder at such a young age. This was far too astonishing, and it was no wonder that even the Return to Origin Palace had recruited him as a disciple. Chang Sunliang, Xiao Sheng, and the other king tiers were all extremely indignant. However, the gulf between them was far too large, and this was a gulf that they couldn't surmount regardless of how freakish their talent was. Even Ling Han would be seeking a beating if he stepped forward. The most he could do was ensure that he didn't die. The king tiers all humphed coldly in their minds. They would determine who the true king tier was after reaching the Severing Mundane tier. A disdainful smile tugged at the corners of Bei Xuanming's lips, and he said, "My venerable master especially told me to seize this opportunity to see whether there are any talented cultivators to recruit into the Return to Origin Palace. Heh, by the looks of it, all of you are trash." Fuck. Everyone was as pissed off as could be. Bei Xianming was indeed a supreme prodigy, but did he really need to taunt them like this? However, there were also those who were extremely roused by his words. Bei Xianming could recruit them into the Return to Origin Palace? Gasp. That was a 4-star force. If they could join such a force, then wouldn't everyone need to treat them with respect in the future? Thus, many cultivators shamelessly approached him to curry favor. However, Bei Xianming acted as aloof as could be. Anyhow, he had only casually said that he could recommend them to the Return to Origin Palace. Regarding whether they could actually join the Return to Origin Palace or not, this wasn't up to him. One had to realize that only the supreme prodigies of 3-star forces would have the right to be recommended to the Return to Origin Palace. Otherwise, they could only participate in the disciple recruitment ceremony of the Return to Origin Palace. However, only a small number of fortunate prodigies would be able to pass all of the trials. After all, the trials were far too difficult, and only genuine king tiers would be able to pass them. Fu Xiaoyun remained apathetic the entire time, and she would only smile when she was talking to Bei Xianming. "What a shame," the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden said. "That man isn't worthy of her at all." Ling Han involuntarily chuckled, and said, "Although he's fairly arrogant, the fact that he's reached the Severing Mundane tier at such a young age is an indication of his supreme talent." However, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was still unwilling to accept this fact. Bei Xianming seemed detestable no matter how she looked at him. Rumble. There was suddenly a deafening boom as the earth fractured, and it was as if the earth were opening its mouth. The Severing Mundane Pool had been a deep and eerie valley before, yet after these fractures, it transformed into a valley that was countless times wider. Moreover, it was so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. At the same time, there were also countless layers of clouds and mist also drifting across its surface. Even Severing Mundane tier Grand Elders couldn't see the depths of this valley. The Severing Mundane Pool had officially opened. Ling Han immediately detected a starkly different power. However, this power was extremely faint and indiscernible. "Severing Mundane power?" the Empress asked as she looked at Ling Han. She also sensed the wisp of starkly different power. Ling Han nodded, and replied, "Most likely. However, the power here is too weak, so we can only barely detect its presence. We can only properly comprehend it after we enter the depths of the valley." No wonder one had to enter the depths of the Severing Mundane Pool to sever the mundane. This was because only the depths of the mystery realm possessed enough mystical power of heaven and earth for one to sever the mundane. Boom! Like a tumultuous wave, the sea of cultivators started to soar into the valley. Some were at the Genesis tier, while others were at the Severing Mundane tier. However, none were at the Dividing Soul tier. Even though these elites had accompanied their juniors here, they all chose to wait outside at this moment. Why? This was because mystery realms like the Severing Mundane Pool possessed unique restrictions against cultivators at higher cultivation levels. Thus, it was extremely likely that they would be killed if they forced their way inside. Even though this was only a mystery realm for severing the mundane, even celestial king tier elites would need to be extremely careful if they wanted to force their way inside, to say nothing of those at the dividing soul tier. Chang Sunliang and Xiao Xing weren't in a hurry to enter the valley. They were both king tiers of the current generation, so they possessed absolute confidence in their own abilities. What did it matter if they entered later? Who at the same cultivation level could rival them? Sister Yun, let's go, Bei Xianming said in a haughty voice. He was already at the peak stage of the first severance, and he was more so an invincible king tier among those at the same cultivation level. Thus, he could naturally crush everyone else in the severing mundane pool. He simply needed to remain wary of the environment that was fraught with danger. Fu Xiaoyun nodded in reply as she entered the valley with Bei Xianming. Their robes fluttered in the wind, and they were like an ethereal and carefree immortal couple. Many people gazed at them in envy. Song Ji and Ma Ying followed not far behind. They were also king tiers, though neither of them had reached the severing mundane tier yet. As such, their aura was naturally suppressed by that of Bei Xianming, causing them to seem less dazzling than the couple before them. Chang Sunliang and Xiao Xing also entered the severing mundane pool. They could be considered as enemies, so there was strong hostility between them as they entered the valley together. One of them wanted to drag the other off the throne of King Tier, while the other wanted to seek revenge for the arrow from before. There were sparks flying between them. Let's enter as well. Ling Han saw Zhang Chong and Mao Shi these two had entered the valley after Chang Sunliang. Recalling his promise to Mao Dai, Ling Han decided to enter the valley behind these two cultivators. However, Ling Han hadn't expected for Mao Shuyu to also come. She most likely hadn't accumulated enough origin power and comprehensions yet, so she was still unable to sever the mundane. Hence, she had most likely come to experience the mystical power of heaven and earth. By doing so, she would have more experience and confidence when it was genuinely her turn to sever the mundane. There was no path in the valley, so they could only continue to fly and descend. After at least 1 hour, they finally reached the ground. However, it was extremely difficult to land here as the ground was littered with stone spikes. There were fresh bloodstains on these spikes, and there were also corpses lying beside them. In fact, these corpses were still warm. Deadly dangers had already appeared. These stone spikes couldn't be touched, even if one channeled their origin power to hover in the air. Even if one lightly trod upon them without making actual contact, these stone spikes would still pierce their skin. Moreover, once their skin was pierced, they would definitely die. Theoretically speaking, this was already no secret. After all, this had already been discovered countless years ago. However, the fact that people still died here proved one thing: there were always those who were overconfident and insisted on seeking death. The three of them maintained a distance of around 5 kilometers behind Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu. This was the limit of how far Ling Han's divine sense could observe, so he could clearly see the actions of the two people before him. Inside the severing mundane pool, the power of heaven and earth was violent, meaning that one couldn't extend their gaze or divine sense too far. Thus, 5 kilometers was the limit of Ling Han's divine sense. The surroundings were frighteningly quiet at this moment, and everyone was fully focused on making their way forward. After all, the severing mundane pool wouldn't be open forever, and it would start to close in around 3 months. If one didn't leave at that time, their fate would most likely be none other than death. This was inevitable, seeing that even celestial kings would frown upon facing the violent and chaotic environment of the severing mundane pool. The valley continued to slope down, yet the surroundings didn't become any darker. Instead, they started to become brighter. This was because some of the rocks were actually radiating with a soft glow. These are radiant rocks, and they possess the great Tao of fire within them. To fire element cultivators, these rocks are incredibly rare treasures, Ling Han told the two women beside him as he sorted through the information in his mind. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden's heart throbbed in excitement when she heard this. She had obtained an inheritance from 3 phoenix kings, and she was also especially skilled in manipulating flames. Thus, these radiant rocks were extremely valuable to her. Ling Han tried to mine these rocks, yet they were far too large and buried far too deep into the earth. There were also jagged rocks in the surroundings, and this made it extremely difficult to get near the radiant rocks and gain enough leverage to mine them. Thus, Ling Han didn't dare to carelessly mine them even with his freakishly powerful physique. In the end, he could only give up in exasperation. Huh. It seems like they've come across trouble, Ling Han suddenly said. He discovered that Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu had suddenly stopped in their tracks. Meanwhile, 13 unfamiliar cultivators had appeared before them. Chapter 1729, Highway Robbers. Ling Han didn't rush over immediately. As long as Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu didn't come across truly life-threatening dangers, he definitely wouldn't reveal himself easily. Firstly, this was to avoid damaging their confidence and dignity. Secondly, this was to avoid making them overly reliant on others. This place was far too dangerous, so much so that even Ling Han needed to be fully alert. Thus, he naturally couldn't become a babysitter for others. However, Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu didn't waste too much time, nor did they need to battle. They easily passed their first trial. Ling Han saw everything clearly. They had passed so easily because Zhang Chong had given each of the 13 people 10 star stones as a road toll. This had greatly angered Mao Shuyu, and she had been on the verge of charging over and attacking. However, Zhang Chong had eventually convinced her to calm down. Their opponents had outnumbered them far too much, and this place was also far too dangerous. Thus, if they weren't careful, they might even risk losing their lives. That being the case, problems that could be solved with money were naturally best solved using money. Moreover, the Severing Mundane pool would only be open for a limited time, so one naturally couldn't waste their precious time on meaningless conflicts such as this. As if they had come here for a holiday, Ling Han and his 2 wives casually wandered over. Halt. Sure enough, they were stopped upon nearing the 13 highway robbers. What's wrong? Ling Han asked in mock astonishment. My brothers and I have been short on funds lately, so we want to borrow some star stones to use. You won't mind helping us, will you? One of the highway robbers said with a taunting smile. These robbers were also eagle-eyed, and they could easily determine what people they could provoke and what people they couldn't provoke. Regarding Ling Han and his 2 wives? Heh. No worries, Ling Han immediately said with a nod. The 13 highway robbers smiled upon hearing this. What an absolute pushover. He was frightened before they had even started to threaten him. This person was definitely a member of some small clan who had been overly protected since a young age. His Genesis tier cultivation level was nothing but show. Wives, we've come across good people. They know we're poor, so they want to give us star stones. Ling Han exclaimed in delight. His expression was full of innocence and naivety. The 13 highway robbers were astonished upon hearing this. Was there something wrong with this person's ears? One of the highway robbers couldn't help but say, Brat, you're the one giving us star stones. Yeah, you're the ones giving us star stones, Ling Han said with a nod. He then reached over and asked, where are the star stones? Fuck. The 13 highway robbers felt extremely vexed. This brat couldn't even differentiate between you and I? One of the highway robbers stepped forward and said, No, it's you. Oh, no, it's we who are giving you star stones. He should understand now, right? Ling Han continued to nod, saying, That's right, you're giving us star stones. Now, hurry up and hand them over. He was Bulsh Ting with a straight face, and the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden could barely contain their laughter. They felt like their husband was incredibly mischievous. He had definitely been negatively influenced by the large black dog. If the large black dog knew this, he would definitely feel extremely irritated. Ling Han had clearly been this mischievous and devious to begin with, so what did it have to do with him? Brat, are you messing with us? The leader of the highway robbers said. He finally came to his senses at this moment. This brat was perhaps stupid, but his two women couldn't also be as stupid as him, right? However, neither of them spoke at this moment, so it was clear that something was wrong. Ling Han smiled, and said, "It seems like you're not downright stupid, after all. You've finally realized." Detestable, the 13 highway robbers roared in anger. They all glowered at Ling Han. "Brat, do you know the consequences of fighting here?" the leader of the highway robbers asked coldly. "You'll immediately die if you come into contact with any of the stone spikes in the surroundings. So, I suggest that you obediently hand your star stones over. That way, you can buy yourself some peace. Anyhow, it's not too expensive, and we only want 100 star stones per person. TSK, the price has risen. 100 is too little. It should be at least 10,000 star stones per person," Ling Han said with a shake of his head. "Huh? Is this brat playing stupid again?" The highway robbers exchanged a glance with. They didn't understand why this person was actually unhappy with paying too little. However, they naturally wouldn't be against making more money. Thus, they all nodded in agreement. Ling Han reached over and said, 10,000 star stones per person. There are 13 of you, so that will come to a total of 200,000 star stones. Wives, my calculation is correct, yeah? He turned around to look at the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. His two wives naturally nodded in agreement. The highway robbers were extremely pissed off. This brat was messing with them again. Shouldn't 13 people mean 130,000 star stones? One of them mumbled softly. Don't speak any more nonsense with him. Capture him and take all of his possessions, the leader of the highway robbers shouted in anger. He immediately charged over and grabbed at Ling Han. The other highway robbers also howled in anger. They had already held back for a very long time. Pang, 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 pang. Ling Han casually moved around, and it wasn't long before all 13 of the highway robbers were beaten into the ground. If it weren't for Ling Han keeping them hovering in the air with his origin power, all of them would have already been killed by the stone spikes on the ground. The highway robbers were scared out of their minds. They hadn't imagined that this foolish-looking man was actually a powerful being in disguise. His battle prowess was completely unrivaled. They had picked on the wrong person. Ling Han smiled, and said, 10,000 each. Are you guys going to pay or not? We'll pay. Of course we'll pay, the highway robbers shouted in unison. Ling Han nodded and removed the restrictions on their bodies, allowing them to stand again. The highway robbers then obediently handed him 10,000 star stones each. This was already the limit of what they could pay. In fact, some of them didn't have enough, and they needed to borrow from others to make the right sum. Not only did they vomit what they had earned before, but they were even exhausted of their own savings. They wanted to cry, yet no tears were forthcoming. Their years of hard work had been stolen by this man. Ling Han counted the star stones as he accepted them. When he finished counting, he angrily asked, "Why is there 70,000 missing? There are 13 of us, so didn't we give you 130,000? Young master, you said 10,000 per person, so 130,000 should be right," the leader of the highway robbers said with a bitter expression. Ling Han's expression became solemn, and he shouted, "Are you looking down on my arithmetic skills? There are 13 of you, so 10,000 star stones each should total 200,000 star stones, no? You genuinely can't count." However, the leader of the bandits didn't dare to retort Ling Han at all. Ling Han was clearly messing with them on purpose. However, even though he knew this, did he dare to complain? The highway robbers had no option but to retrieve more star stones. However, in the end, they could only gather 50,000 star stones. This was still 20,000 short of the 70,000 star stones that Ling Han demanded. Thus, they could only use godly metal and saintly materials to make up for this amount. Anyhow, Ling Han's intention was to milk them dry, so after achieving his aim, he patted his hands and left. The 13 highway robbers could only look on with bitter expressions. "Boss, should we continue?" one of the highway robbers asked. The leader of the highway robbers grimaced and said, "Forget about it. Let's return and continue our successful business as mountain bandits. This place is far too dangerous, and it's not suitable for us." The remaining highway robbers all nodded in agreement. They had already been traumatized by Ling Han. Meanwhile, Ling Han and his two wives quickly caught up to Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu, once again following 5 kilometers behind them. As they advanced, the deadly stone spikes gradually disappeared from the ground. All that remained was jagged mountains and stones of extremely peculiar shapes. This was a relatively safe region, though some of the stones were actually demonic beasts in disguise. As one passed by, some of the stones might suddenly jump up and attack. However, they were fairly fortunate, and they didn't come across any such situation. After advancing for another 2 hours, they arrived before a cliff face that was filled with caves. It looked much like a beehive. Each of these caves would lead into the depths of the severing mundane pool. However, each of them possessed different dangers, and if one chose the most dangerous cave, they could only pray that they made it out alive. Chapter 1730, Accumulating Experience. Damn it. Ling Han quickened his pace, yet when he arrived before the cliff face, Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu had already disappeared. This cliff face possessed a mystical power of heaven and earth that could obstruct one's vision and divine sense. Thus, Ling Han only knew that Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu had entered one of the caves in the cliff face. However, he didn't know which specific one they had entered. He shook his head and said, "There's nothing I can do about this now. They can only rely on themselves now." However, the Empress didn't think much of this, saying, "As a cultivator, one naturally can't be overly reliant on others. Otherwise, they'll only wind up as trash, regardless of how high their cultivation level is." Ling Han nodded in agreement. Since Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu had dared to enter the severing mundane pool, they were naturally prepared to risk their lives as well. Moreover, without enough confidence, who would dare to enter the severing mundane pool? Let's also choose a cave to enter. Ling Han casually chose a cave before entering with the Empress and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden. The cave wasn't small, and it was wide enough to comfortably fit 5 people side by side. However, the cave was extremely dark, and the floor was also especially uneven, with some places higher and some places lower. After blindly walking forward for several hours, a glimmer of light suddenly appeared before them. The world around them became radiant, and they were surprised to discover that they had actually arrived in a snowy plain. What a strange environment. Snow drifted through the air, and there was not a single footprint on the snow-covered ground. Perhaps they were the first ones to arrive, or perhaps the people before them hadn't left any footprints. They continued to walk forward, lightly treading on the snowy ground. Although they left footprints, these were extremely shallow footprints that were quickly covered by the snow. As they advanced, the cave behind them eventually disappeared from sight. All that they could see was an expanse of white snow. There was no notion of north, south, east, or west. However, Ling Han's sense of direction was extremely strong, and he continued to advance in a direction that was opposite to the direction of the cave. Ling Han suddenly stopped and looked to his left. The Empress also looked to the left with an alert expression. A patch of snowy land there was slightly bulging up, and this bulge had stretched over from far away in the distance. Pung! The mound of snow suddenly exploded upon reaching them, with a giant claw reaching out and swiping at Ling Han and his 2 wives. Immediately afterward, a colossal figure rose up from the snow. This was a giant white bear that had a pair of bat-like wings on its back. These wings were crimson like flames, and it was as if they were burning. The Empress humphed coldly as she stepped forward and extended a finger. A burst of sword chi instantly soared into the sky. Pooh! The white bear howled in pain as blood sprayed from its body. It hurriedly beat its wings and retreated, leaving a trail of sanguine blood on the snowy white ground. Roar! The white bear's howl instantly received a reply from the distance. As if losing the pull of gravity, the layers of white snow instantly flew into the air. Only when the roar subsided did the snow slam back down into the ground. Severing mundane tier. Ling Han said solemnly. This was definitely the might of a severing mundane tier Grand Elder. This might far surpassed what Genesis tier cultivators could unleash. As it turned out, the white bear before them was only a cub. However, the Empress didn't show any mercy. This bear had attacked them, so she saw no reason to spare its life. She was extremely ruthless as she aimed to dispose of the white bear in just a few strikes. At this moment, a colossal white bear appeared in the distance. It then flapped its two fiery red wings, soaring hundreds of kilometers with each flap. It was swooping toward Ling Han and his two wives. Meanwhile, that small, white bear howled frantically. It couldn't hold on for much longer. The colossal white bear roared in fury upon seeing this. It was as if it were warning Ling Han and the others to stop, or else it would definitely kill them if they dared to kill the small white bear. However, Ling Han was completely unfazed. After all, would this colossal white bear spare them if they spared the small white bear? He transported the heavenly phoenix divine maiden into the black tower before jumping up and charging at the colossal white bear. Boom! He unleashed his 9 heavens flame. This was his only technique that could threaten severing mundane tier Grand Elders. Meanwhile, the Empress continued to ruthlessly attack the small white bear. After 2 more strikes, the small white bear gave a cry of pity as its divine sense was obliterated. The colossal white bear instantly unleashed an earth-shattering roar of fury. It ferociously charged at Ling Han, yearning to kill him and everyone around him. Ling Han unleashed his lightning sword technique and imbued it with the 9 heavens flame, causing it to become extremely destructive. However, the colossal white bear was at the severing mundane tier, and demonic beasts more so possessed extremely powerful physiques. As such, Ling Han's sword chi was only able to slice some fur from the colossal white bear. Paw! Ling Han was sent flying by the colossal white bear's palm strike. A searing pain shot through his body, causing him to bare his teeth in agony. This bear wasn't at the first severance, but rather at the second severance. Otherwise, it couldn't have made Ling Han experience such torturous pain. It was as if all of his bones were about to break. Ling Han landed next to the Empress, and he immediately reached over to transport her into the Black Tower. At the same time, he didn't waste the small white bear's corpse either, also transporting it into the Black Tower. The flesh of Genesis tier demonic beasts was extremely nutritious. The colossal white bear went wild with fury. Not only had these 2 humans killed its cub, but they were even taking its corpse. It launched a flurry of ferocious attacks at Ling Han. It had to kill him no matter what. Ling Han engaged in a life and death battle with the colossal white bear. He was about to advance to the severing mundane tier, so battling against a demonic beast at this cultivation level would definitely be extremely beneficial to him. Moreover, casting one's gaze over the entire celestial realm, only Ling Han possessed the ability to challenge first severance or second severance Grand Elders while still at the Genesis tier. At least this was the case among the forces under the Celestial King tier. However, Ling Han wasn't feeling too great at this moment. His godly bones were far from being able to withstand attacks from second severance Grand Elders, so fractures would appear on his bones with each attack from the colossal white bear. The indestructible Heaven Scroll couldn't heal them in time, so the number of fractures in his bones became greater and greater until they eventually shattered. Ling Han channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid, and instantly healed all of his wounds. He then started to furiously battle against the colossal white bear again. However, what ensued was merely a repeat of his previous pummeling. All of his bones were shattered again. This time, Ling Han didn't have any more indestructible true fluid to channel. Thus, he could only enter the Black Tower to flee from the colossal white bear. Anyhow, he had already battled for long enough, so it was time for him to analyze and comprehend the process of his battle. Ling Han sat under the reincarnation tree, carefully analyzing each moment of his battle as he continued to recover from his wounds. This allowed him to gain a deeper understanding of the severing mundane tier. Although he had battled against Ding Hu before, Ding Hu had been far too weak, and hadn't been able to wound him at all. Meanwhile, Ding Yaolong had been far too powerful, so Ling Han hadn't been able to gain any comprehension from him either. As for that colossal white bear, its power had been just right. It had left him with many wounds, yet it hadn't threatened his life straight away. If I wanted to sever my own mundane matters this time, I would already have full confidence in performing a flawless severance. However, if I want to sever heaven and earth, then I don't have any confidence at all, Ling Han said in summary. However, this didn't matter too much. After all, Ling Han had yet to genuinely come into contact with the mystical power of heaven and earth. At that time, he would definitely gain some extra comprehension. The three of them exited the Black Tower. The colossal white bear had already left long ago, leaving only a large number of giant craters in the surroundings. These craters were most likely the result of the colossal white bear venting its anger after being unable to find Ling Han. Ling Han and his two wives quickly left this region. After several hours, they were fairly certain that they had already left the colossal white bear's territory. However, their surroundings were still a vast expanse of white. The environment hadn't changed at all. This place was far too dangerous, and Ling Han and his two wives encountered many battles. Apart from the colossal wild bear, they also came across a snow eagle, an ice wolf, and a snow leopard. Some were at the Genesis tier, while some were at the Severing Mundane tier. Facing those at the Genesis tier, Ling Han directly killed them and placed their corpses into the Black Tower. Their meat was extremely nutritious, so he naturally couldn't waste them. As for those at the Severing Mundane tier, Ling Han simply charged over to exchange a few strikes. This was in order to accumulate experience. Meanwhile, the Empress had also fought against some of the first Severance demonic beasts. She had developed a divine fetus, and her 10 bodies could also split the damage that she received. Although her defensive abilities were inferior to Ling Han's, she could still exchange several blows with the first Severance demonic beasts. The husband and wife continued to battle as they advanced, and this left the heavenly phoenix divine maiden feeling extremely envious. Her battle prowess was far inferior to Ling Han's and the Empress. Chapter 1731, Battle. Several days passed, and they finally left the vast expanse of snowy plains. There was a river before them, and the water in this river was extremely chaotic. This was like a parent river that had existed since the creation of the world. One couldn't enter this river wantonly, or else they would be directly killed by its immense and chaotic power. Afterward, they would need to go against the flow of this river to reach someplace near its origin. After arriving at the banks of the river there, they would have essentially reached the deepest regions of the Severing Mundane pool. In fact, one couldn't fly above this river either, as the vapor that rose from this river contained all kinds of deadly weapons that were formed from the regulations of the Great Tao. These were weapons that could easily kill elites at the Severing Mundane tier, Dividing Soul tier, and even Immortal Palace tier. If one wanted to travel along this river, they would need to collect wood from the nearby trees to build a raft. Moreover, regardless of which cave one chose before, all of them would eventually lead to this river. If one failed to reach this river, this signified that they had already died in the caves. The trees beside this river were extremely precious. Not only could they be used to build rafts, but the fruits that they bore were also extremely valuable. These fruits were called Severing Mundane fruits. As its name suggested, this was a fruit that could help one advance to the Severing Mundane tier. How could it help? These fruits didn't contain power at the Severing Mundane tier, nor did they contain comprehensions of the Severing Mundane tier. Rather, ingesting these fruits would allow one to absorb the mystical power of heaven and earth in this mystery realm. Thus, the more of these Severing Mundane fruits one ate, the more mystical power of heaven and earth one would be able to accumulate while severing the mundane. This would allow their severance to become closer to flawless. Of course, one wouldn't need the help of these Severing Mundane fruits if they were already supremely talented, and could command a limitless amount of mystical power of heaven and earth with their own abilities. These fruits were used for support, and the most important aspect was still one's own comprehensions. Ling Han and his two wives started to walk along the bank of the river. They had to find the precious trees as soon as possible so that they could cut them down to build a raft. Otherwise, the banks of the river would disappear soon, and there would be no other path for them to walk. Luck was on their side, and they quickly came across a towering tree. Ling Han immediately unsheathed his divine demon sword to fell this tree. He then scraped off its bark and sawed the tree into planks. With this done, he started to weave the bark of the tree into a rope. After using this rope to tie the wooden planks together, a simple raft quickly appeared before him. Ling Han naturally did all of this heavy labor by himself. However, before he could complete the finishing touches, he saw a group of 4 people approaching them. There was delight on their faces as they looked at the nearly completed raft. "Leave the wooden raft here and fuck off," a young man said haughtily. 3 of them were at the Genesis tier, while one of them was a Severing Mundane tier Grand Elder. However, because he had only completed the weakest severance, he had especially come here to perform his second severance. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to accumulate enough Severing Mundane power in the outside world. Even so, a Severing Mundane tier Grand Elder was still a Severing Mundane tier Grand Elder. They possessed a crushing advantage over Genesis tier cultivators, so they could naturally act as haughtily and wantonly as they desired. The first Severance Grand Elder looked to be around 50 years old. He had a short beard, and his hands were clasped behind his back as he looked at Ling Han in contempt. Not only was he here to perform his second severance this time, but he had also been tasked with guarding 3 youths from his clan to perform their first severance. Anyhow, this was also the most dazzling moment of their Chi clan. There were actually 3 members of the younger generation severing their mundane together. If they succeeded, the power of the Chi clan would definitely soar to a new height. However, it was a pity that severing the mundane wasn't so easy. Having 1 out of 10,000 people succeed would already be a very good result. This was a difficult path that was fraught with fatal dangers. Ling Han swept his gaze across the 4 people before asking, "You people want to steal my raft?" "Steal? We're more powerful than you, so you naturally need to obey our commands. Otherwise, die," the young man from before said. There was a menacing killing intent on his face. This was a mystery realm that was completely sealed off from the outside world. In fact, even rare treasures wouldn't be able to initiate contact with the outside world. Thus, as long as there were no witnesses, they could easily kill people to shut them up. Ling Han shook his head. He then looked at the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden before saying, "It looks like we can't avoid battle." "So be it," the Empress said. She was naturally unafraid. Ling Han transported the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden into the Black Tower before asking, "Do you want the big fish or the small fry?" "The big fish," the Empress replied with a soaring fighting spirit. "No worries. Call me if you start to struggle," Ling Han said with a smile. He was genuinely unafraid of First Severance Grand Elders. Even if he couldn't kill them, such Grand Elders couldn't threaten his life. The Empress instantly dashed forward to attack the First Severance Grand Elder. Xiao, xiao, xiao. Her 9 clones materialized beside her, leaving 10 Empresses on the battlefield. However, none of her 9 clones were wearing face veils, so their breathtaking beauty instantly left the 4 cultivators from the Chi clan stunned. Holy fuck, holy fuck. How can such beautiful women exist in the world? However, the First Severance Grand Elder was still slightly astonished by the Empress' battle prowess. Her strength had already far surpassed the level of ordinary Genesis tier cultivators, though it was still far inferior to First Severance Grand Elders. In any case, her battle prowess could already be regarded as at the level of pseudo-Severing Mundane tier Grand Elders. She was a supreme prodigy. Ha ha ha. The First Severance Grand Elder laughed heartily. Although he had already severed the mundane, this didn't mean that he had also severed his mortal emotions and desires. He immediately grabbed at the Empress. So what if she was a pseudo-Severing Mundane tier Grand Elder? Before a genuine Severing Mundane tier Grand Elder, she was as weak and frail as could be. However, the reality was starkly different from his expectations. The Empress was extremely powerful, and the first Severance Grand Elder was unable to suppress her in just a few strikes. However, this didn't matter. If a few strikes weren't enough, then he would add a few more strikes. Ling Han also moved at this moment, launching a fist at the 3 Genesis tier cultivators. "You're seeking death," the 3 juniors from the Qi clan roared. They all replied with an attack of their own. Ling Han's fist soared over. Boom! A junior from the Qi clan was instantly smashed apart, directly transforming into a cloud of flesh and blood. He was completely obliterated. In Ling Han's eyes, these 4 people were even more detestable than the highway robbers from before. Thus, he had spared the highway robbers, and only stripped them of their wealth. Now, however, he was killing the juniors from the Qi clan without any mercy. Ah! The 2 remaining juniors from the Qi clan roared with wild rage. They were both furious and terrified. This was because they might suffer the exact same fate. How is he this powerful? The first Severance Grand Elder was completely stunned. Both of these youths were far too extraordinary, with one being even more powerful than the other. How was this possible? If they were king tiers, he should have at least heard about them before. "You all deserve to die," the first Severance Grand Elder howled as he sent the Empress flying with a palm strike. He then turned around to charge at Ling Han. If he didn't stop him, the remaining 2 juniors would definitely be killed by him as well. However, Ling Han ignored him, and continued to attack the 2 juniors of the Qi clan. Pooh! Before the first Severance Grand Elder had even arrived, another junior of the Qi clan was mercilessly killed by Ling Han. Ah! The first Severance Grand Elder was about to go crazy. However, he finally arrived at this moment, and he immediately reached toward the last remaining junior, transporting him into his spatial god tool. After doing this, he didn't have anything else to worry about. He immediately turned around to attack Ling Han. "I'll take a handicap of 100 strikes. It's your victory if you can wound me," Ling Han said with a smile. Pang, pang, pang. The first Severance Grand Elder struck out in rage, with his attacks as wild and furious as could be. However, upon striking Ling Han, they could only cause him to waver around from left to right. These attacks were completely unable to wound him. The first Severance Grand Elder was astounded. What kind of freak is he? To say nothing of Genesis tier cultivators, even fellow first Severance Grand Elders couldn't withstand such wild and wanton attacks from him. Chapter 1732, Source Water. Ling Han did not continue just being on the brunt of the beating. He channeled the 9 heavens flame, and boom, the fiery flames burned the skies. That first Severance Grand Elder immediately stepped back. He had a feeling if this flame touched him even in the slightest, he would be burned to nothing. He only stopped when he had retreated more than 300 meters away, his eyes fixed on that flame, and his expression changing swiftly. He steadied his mind, and upon a closer look, he realized that he had made a big fuss over a minor issue. This flame was indeed very frightening, but it was practically impossible that it would be able to penetrate his defenses. So strange, it gave him a feeling of lingering fear, but the fact was that it was not very strong either. Suddenly, a thought flashed in his mind, and an idea that he did not dare believe emerged. Ancestral flame. According to legend, there were a total of 9 types of ancestral flames in the celestial realm, and they were the source of all flames. They could also be considered as the most direct manifestation of fire regulations. Someone had once foretold that if one managed to obtain all the 9 ancestral flames, they would be able to successfully attain the strongest fire regulations, and place above all the kings. Could it be that this was one of the ancestral flames? Otherwise, the other party was only in Genesis tier, so why did he feel a wariness that he would die if he was touched by this fire? This brat had been blessed with divine luck, and actually refined an ancestral flame. That first Severance Grand Elder's eyes turned bloodshot from envy. Not even a celestial king could absolutely and with complete certainty encounter such an ultimate treasure, yet it was now possessed by a mere Genesis tier. He was going to take this fated opportunity for his own. Ha 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 ha, this is mine. That first Severance Grand Elder grabbed out at Ling Han, regulations entwined around his hands. This would be enough to resist the 9 heavens flame. Ling Han sighed. Any second Severance Grand Elders that would come here would have just barely passed the ordeal during the first severance aside from Bei Xianming. But even so, this king among kings of Genesis tier like him would still be completely incapable of matching such a severing mundane tier ancestor that was so weak. The difference between immortal level and celestial level was really colossal. No wonder so many people were filled with confidence, and thought that no matter how wide the difference in power they had with others at present, they only had to advance into the severing mundane tier, and it would be equivalent to having begun from the same starting line. We'll stop here today, and when we meet next, I'll take your wretched head then. Ling Han threw out the wooden raft and left with the Empress, leaving a first Severance Grand Elder roaring in fury behind them. There was nothing that could be done. Great Tao was rippling in the river waters, and perhaps only a celestial king would be capable of crossing the river by force. We have to reach severing mundane tier as soon as possible, Ling Han said solemnly. The Empress nodded earnestly. Even though they were presently invincible amongst Genesis tiers, they would be helpless if they met a first Severance Grand Elder, and this was really very displeasing to them. The river flow was very quick, but there weren't many splashing waves. It was so calm that it was slightly frightening. If one looked closely at the river waters, one would discover that there were patterns of great Tao rippling amidst the water. Too bad, this river water could not be consumed. Otherwise, for cultivators that cultivated water regulations, this would be a precious treasure. There were no living creatures in the waters. This was very normal. If anything could actually survive in this kind of river water, then this kind of living creature would have to be of the level of Celestial King tier, which would be terrifying. Go to the source of the river, Small Tower suddenly spoke up. After entering into the celestial realm, it was as if Small Tower had become invisible, and basically ignored Ling Han completely. According to its words, the celestial realm was abundant with spiritual qi, and was of great help to its recovery, so it could not be bothered to give any regard to Ling Han. He had not thought that it would actually speak up of its own volition at this moment. Ling Han mentally said, "There is definitely no good news every time you speak up. Is it that you have discovered something that is beneficial for your recovery here?" Small Tower sneered, and said, "I suspect that there is source water of the heaven and earth here, and initially planned to help you attain it, but since you're saying this, then I can't be bothered to be a busybody either." Wait, what is source water of heaven and earth? Ling Han asked hurriedly. Since the heaven and earth have borne the 9 great ancestral flames, then why wouldn't there be mother water that is of the same level? Small Tower said evenly, and then made no further comment after. Ancestral flame, source water, the same level. Ling Han inhaled sharply, and asked, "Can I also refine it so that it would become my source power?" Theoretically, yes, Small Tower said. However, at present, I have no desire to help you get the source water of heaven and earth at all, so that is now completely impossible. Fuck, this proud tower, hadn't he just teased it a little? Ling Han sighed, and said, "Stop playing around and be serious." Small Tower gave a few humps, and finally said, "It is highly possible that this river is formed from the source water of heaven and earth, so if you trace down its source, you should be able to discover the presence of the source water." "How should I collect it?" Ling Han asked. "This river water cannot be touched at all, the slightest contact would mean death. Without my guidance, you are naturally going to end up dead, but with my presence, everything would be different," Small Tower declared proudly, but did not continue speaking. Clearly, it was holding a grudge. "Good Small Tower, my words just now were too harsh just now." Ling Han could only surrender. If it was an enemy, he could still defeat him, but the proud tower was in his body, and he was completely helpless against it. Small Tower put on airs for a while longer, and then continued, "In truth, it is very simple. You have refined the 9 heavens flame as your life force, so you only need to wrap yourself in 9 heavens flame, and you will be able to guarantee that you will not be injured by the source water. Will that work? Ling Han was doubtful. The 9 heavens flame hadn't even reached severing mundane tier, so how was it supposed to resist this kind of source water? Stupid, I'm not asking you to directly resist the source water. This is only a sliver of aura that has seeped out from the source water. If the 9 heavens flame could not resist even this, then what right does it have to be called one of the ancestral flames? Small Tower asked in disapproval. But I still have to sever my mortal bonds, and if I veer off my original course, Ling Han was hesitant. If he missed this opportunity of breaking through to the severing mundane tier, he would have to wait for another 10 million years, or would have to look again for a different location to sever his mortal bonds. But if he would also have to wait 10 million years, he would definitely choose to first break through to the severing mundane tier, and come back in future to collect the source water. Sigh, how did I get such a stupid master like you? Small Tower sighed in despair. The whole mystery realm should be formed by the source water of heaven and earth, so if you could gain the source water, that would be equivalent to severing your mortal bonds in a location where the power of heaven and earth is most abundant, and that is still not enough? Ling Han was immediately relieved. This was great, it would not delay either matter. The 9 heavens flame was already incredibly awesome, so if he could gain a source water of heaven and earth and make it into his own source power, what kind of impressive extent would his battle prowess reach? He related this matter to the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. Both women naturally agreed that he should go and collect the source water. In any case, the Empress could enter into the Black Tower, come back out when they arrived where the source water was, and break through into the severing mundane tier there. Ling Han sent out multiple palm strikes, pushing the wooden raft forwards. On the way, he had also caught up with a great many people. He saw that a great battle broke out between some wooden rafts when they encountered one another. The people on board only had to be blasted into the water, and they would definitely be done for. They journeyed for another stretch, and he discovered Mao Shuyu and Zhang Chong to his surprise. Thus, he followed behind the two of them. This decision of his was very correct because these two people encountered quite a number of waves of attacks, and in the last wave, they were not able to resolve the attack. It was Ling Han who moved and helped them resolve their crisis. Mao Shuyu's eyes were sharp, and she recognized Ling Han. Zhang Chong, meanwhile, was embarrassed. When he thought of his previous attitude towards Ling Han, and how now the latter helped him, taking no account of their former enmity, this made him feel quite apologetic. Thus, Ling Han accompanied them on the journey. 2 days later, they went ashore. From here, they could head towards the final location for severing mundane tier, but it was also the most dangerous place in the severing mundane pool, the Cave of Death. Chapter 1733, Severing Mortal Bonds in the Lake Center. Why aren't you guys continuing on with us? Mao Shuyu asked curiously. They should climb ashore once they had reached this place, and head to the Cave of Death. Ling Han shook his head, and said, You guys go on ahead. We still have to head somewhere else. Somewhere else? Hadn't they come to the severing mundane pool to sever their mortal bonds? Then there was only one place they had to go, final destination, the Cave of Death. Why did they have to go somewhere else? But since Ling Han was not saying, Mao Shuyu could not find out anything even though she was incredibly curious. She could only continue onwards with Zhang Chong in tow and her heart filled with confusion. Ling Han and his group, meanwhile, continued on the wooden raft, and traveled upriver. Ling Han thought he had not disappointed the request that Mao Dai had made of him by sending Zhang Chong and Mao Shuyu here. No matter what, it was impossible that he could watch over the two of them for the whole way and be their babysitter. The three of them boarded the wooden raft, but saw Fu Xiaoyun and Bei Xianming had just caught up with them, but what was surprising was they, too, did not climb ashore, but rather continued traveling against the river's flow, as if they were also heading towards the source water. The two sides made eye contact. Fu Xiaoyun was expressionless, while Bei Xianming showed a taunting expression as he asked, Mere ants, What right do you have to travel alongside this holy sun? Oh, do you know what is at the source of this river? Ling Han asked deliberately. Bei Xianming humphed and retorted, what need is there for me to tell you? It can't be that you're pretending to know when you don't. Ling Han laughed loudly. Instantly, Bei Xianming showed killing intent. This little ant actually dared to mock him? He immediately wanted to make a move, but Fu Xiaoyun stopped him, so he could only give up in displeasure. Fu Xiaoyun looked at Ling Han and said, a senior of my clan advised me that if I wish to sever my mortal bonds in a different manner, I can only head to the source of this river. Only the mystical power of heaven and earth there would be enough to support this method. She paused, and seemed to be watching for any change in Ling Han's expression, but how could Ling Han possibly reveal anything? Thus, she continued, why do you want to go to the source of the river as well? Severing Mundane in a different manner would mean striking the heaven and earth. The other was an heiress of a 3-star force, so it was not strange that she knew that she could deliver a strike onto heaven and earth. But what made Ling Han secretly pleased with his luck was the fact that one could only deliver a strike onto heaven and earth at the great river's source, and it could not be done in the Cave of Death. After all, Mao Dai had only guessed that the severing mundane pool could allow him to strike the heaven and earth, but limited by his cultivation level and experience, how could he compare to a noble clan of immortal palace tier? He really had to thank Small Tower. If not for its warning, Ling Han would not be able to strike the heaven and earth. He would either be severely injured or even killed by the backlash, or could only deliver that strike onto himself. Ling Han smiled, and said, how coincidental. I, too, wish to sever my mortal bonds in a different manner. Ha ha ha, you think you can? Bei Xianming laughed loudly. Among the veteran 3-star forces, it was no secret that one could advance into the severing mundane tier by delivering a strike on the heaven and earth. But being aware was one thing, and being able to do it was another. Bei Xianming had also once thought of striking the heaven and earth, but in the end, he did not manage to. This strike was still delivered onto his own mortal bonds. And now a brat that had popped out from who knew where actually said he wanted to sever his mortal bonds in a different manner. That was a real joke. Whether I can or otherwise will only be known after I try, Ling Han said, being neither too humble nor proud. Bei Xianming wanted to fly into a rage again. A mere Genesis tier actually dared to speak to him in this manner? Yet Fu Xiaoyun smiled, and said, then let's travel together. She was very curious about Ling Han because she could not see through him at all. It should be known that she had cultivated a celestial technique. It was not very destructive, but she could see through the real condition of others, but she could not see through Ling Han. There was only one reason for this, and that was that his strength was far superior to hers. Was this even possible? She did not believe it. She herself was already a king tier of Genesis tier, so how could there possibly be anyone that was far stronger than her? It had to be that Ling Han had cultivated a secret technique that could block her probe. This made her very curious, and she wanted to know exactly what secret technique that was. Ling Han smiled slightly, and said, forget it, I don't like this guy, and this guy doesn't like me either, so we had best travel separately. He pointed at Bei Xianming. Bei Xianming almost exploded in fury. He was a first severance Grand Elder, and only he had the right to dislike Ling Han. Was this brat treating him like they were equals? Fu Xiaoyun smiled daintily, however, and only felt that Ling Han was very interesting. She nodded, and said, all right, I hope you will be able to successfully sever your mortal bonds in a different manner. Same to you. Ling Han clasped his hands in response. By now, he also felt that it was a slight pity for Fu Xiaoyun to be matched with Bei Xianming. She was clearly too good for him. Bei Xianming looked coldly at Ling Han, his killing intent surging. He definitely had to find some chance to kill Ling Han. Ling Han could see this, and merely smiled faintly. He only had to successfully advance into the severing mundane tier, and even if Bei Xianming advanced into the second severance, so what? He could still crush him. The two wooden rafts advanced continuously, going against the flow of the river. After traveling for a whole 3 days, the source of the river finally appeared ahead of them. The endless river water was surging out of a giant lake, and there was a massive rock in the water, forming an island at the center of the lake. It was really tough for them to reach this point. There were many whirlpools on their way there, and the slightest carelessness could destroy their rafts and kill them. Thankfully, their reaction speed was incredibly fast, or even if it was a first Severance Grand Elder, he could still be finished on the way here. In this place, that mysterious mystical power of heaven and earth was rolling out, and was incredibly abundant. After Fu Xiaoyun and Bei Xianming rowed their raft to stop at the side of the rock, the two of them first climbed ashore, and then stored the wooden raft into a spatial spirit tool. They planned to sever their mortal bonds here. One was aiming for celestial level, while the other was planning to attain the second severance. Ling Han and his group also climbed ashore the island at the lake center, and similarly put the wooden raft away. Meanwhile, Small Tower was mentally speaking to Ling Han, telling him that the source water of heaven and earth should be at the bottom of this lake. To go underwater now? Ling Han shook his head. If he was to dive alone, he would be worried about the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. If he took them into the Black Tower, the Empress would not be able to advance to severing Mundane tier. Who knew how long it would take to sever one's mortal bonds, so how could he waste time? Moreover, he, too, had to advance into the severing Mundane tier. He thought for a moment, and decided to first sever his mortal bonds with the Empress. After they advanced into the severing Mundane tier, he would then set out in search of the source water of heaven and earth. If he could obtain it, he would be lucky, but if he did not manage to, then he would just forget about it. He could always come back after he had become a celestial king. But if he missed this opportunity to sever his mortal bonds, he would have to wait another 10 million years. This was too long a time. He told the Empress this, and the two of them sat down on the island in the lake center, and began their breakthrough to the severing Mundane tier. Though the two of them had already reached the peak stage of Genesis tier, severing Mundane tier was a completely different beginning. All their previous experience would be of no help. They could only comprehend the unique mystical power of the heaven and earth here, and then attempt to control this power to deliver a strike onto themselves. Because they were inexperienced, this was especially dangerous. In the slightest moment of carelessness, they could kill themselves. And the severing Mundane pool was one of the best locations for severing mortal bonds. This mystical power of heaven and earth was also especially strong, so the strength of the strike was naturally astonishing. Ling Han and the others all tried hard to get used to this kind of mystical power. Because Bei Xianming had already struck himself once, he appeared to be very much at ease. Additionally, the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was also getting used to this kind of mystical power. There would come the day that she would have to strike herself eventually. This mystical power was heartless and cold, and represented the fact that the heavens were completely impartial, and would not take into account wealth, strength, or nobility. In the eyes of the heavens, every existence was equal. And this heartlessness would become a blade to sever the mortal bond that one valued the most, and then one would be able to advance into the severing Mundane tier. It was easier said than done. This kind of mortal bond, kinship bond, was also called karmic hindrance and obsession. How could it be severed so easily? Chapter 1734, Breaking Through to the Severing Mundane tier. The 5 people all sat down cross-legged. They formed 2 clear separate groups, each occupying one side of the island at the lake center. Bei Xianming was naturally displeased. Those 3 were only in the Genesis tier, so what qualified them to be his equals? If it was not for the fact that Fu Xiaoyun forbade him, he'd really want to throw all 3 of them into the river. Towards this lover, he was considerably pleased. Her status and identity were only slightly inferior to his, and her talent was not inferior to his at all. And precisely because of this, he was still willing to give Fu Xiaoyun enough face despite the fact his cultivation level far surpassed hers. He calmed his mind. Though a prodigy like him no longer needed to come to a severing Mundane mystery realm to be able to deliver the second strike, the mystical power of heaven and earth here was endless, and could still decrease some of the difficulty for him. Second severance, come on," he called out mentally. As a man, he naturally had his own pride, always thinking that he should be stronger than his own woman to have mental balance. Otherwise, if he did not break through to the second severance, and Fu Xiaoyun had successfully achieved the first severance, the two of them would be equal in cultivation level. His pride would be hurt. Ling Han, the Empress, and Fu Xiaoyun were all closely appreciating the mystical power of heaven and earth. As long as their grasp of it was proficient enough, they could then attempt to sever their mortal bonds. The heaven and earth were impartial, treating all living creatures like straw dogs. This embodied a kind of justice, an absolute fairness. No matter what you were, in the eyes of the heavens, there was no difference of nobility and lowliness, and all were equal. If one wanted to comprehend Great Tao, the best method naturally was to create a resonance with Great Tao. First, one would have to learn to be as heartless as the heavens, and delivering a strike on oneself would be severing the mortal bond that one valued the most, which was equivalent to presenting one's sincerity to the heavens. The more thoroughly this first strike was delivered, the higher the level of agreement one would achieve with Great Tao, and then one's battle prowess would naturally be higher, and it would also become considerably easier for one to comprehend the regulations of the Great Tao in the future. However, Ling Han and the others did not want to strike themselves, but rather strike the heaven and earth. Ling Han sat down in a cross-legged position. Multiple streaks of comprehension came to being in his mind. Striking at the heaven and earth was only a kind of theory, but the true meaning of it was to separate oneself from the heaven and earth. One was a heaven and earth of his own, and he himself was the Great Tao. This was not impossible, because cultivators had journeyed all the way from being weak to becoming strong, and this actually was a process of improving one's inner world. Building mountain and river, constructing sun and moon, forming stars for eternal river. This was actually a miniature version of the greater world, and the only difference was that there were no regulations. Thus, if one wanted to deliver a strike onto the heaven and earth, one would need to borrow regulations from the heaven and earth, turning it into the regulations of one's own inner world. Perhaps there would come a day when this inner world would evolve to become a real universe. Why was it more beneficial to strike the heaven and earth? One method was to strike oneself, and he would become a subordinate of this heaven and earth, and the other was to deliver a strike onto the heaven and earth, and he would become his own existence, which meant being equal with this world. At least that was the case in terms of level. Then, wasn't it very clear which was the better method? But the problem here was, again, how should this strike be delivered? There was no experience that they could adhere to, and no one could tell them what they should do. It was just like severing one's mortal bonds. No one could tell you how you should deliver this strike. This was a test that the heaven and earth had imposed on you, and you would have to completely depend on yourself. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so few severing mundane ancestors in the celestial realm, with an unlimited lifespan. As long as one had enough time, the number of this group should have theoretically increased to a frightening number. But the fact of the matter was that even a 2-star city only had about 1,000 severing mundane ancestors, which was proof of how rare they were. Ling Han and the others were simulating the various possibilities in their minds. Though they were all extraordinary geniuses, the king tiers of the younger generation, it was still extremely difficult to take the step of advancing into the severing mundane tier, especially when they wanted to deliver a strike onto the heaven and earth. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. 5 days later, Fu Xiaoyun suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, her energy withering for a moment. She couldn't help but show an expression of shock. Previously, she had attempted to sever her mortal bonds, but she had almost severed her own life. Thankfully, before she had entered here, she had once received a boost from the seniors of her clan, which could take a severe injury in her place once. Otherwise, even if she hadn't died, she would have been heavily injured now. Putting aside advancing into the severing mundane tier, merely recuperation would take tens of thousands of years or even a few million years. She calmed her heart. Though she had almost died, she had seen a sliver of hope in the midst of her failure. She was sure that she definitely would be able to succeed. She was a top-grade king tier, she definitely could succeed. In curiosity, she looked towards Ling Han and his group. She ignored the heavenly phoenix divine maiden completely. This woman had not even touched the verge of the severing mundane tier yet. Her primary focus was on Ling Han and the Empress. These two people gave her a feeling that they were unfathomable. Under the rule of the Fu clan, when had two such talents appeared? And they even knew of the other method to advance into the severing mundane tier? Pooh! She saw the Empress suddenly throw up blood. Her body actually exploded, but what made Fu Xiaoyun incredibly stunned was the fact that this body actually turned into shards of great Tao. Then, they immediately disappeared, and the Empress reappeared, completely unscathed. This. Fu Xiaoyun was dumbfounded. What was going on here? She had clearly failed to sever her mortal bonds, and received a backlash from the heaven and earth. She was already dead, but why was she still fine? Was she seeing things? That was impossible. A great Genesis tier could actually be seeing things. She naturally would not know that the Empress had formed 9 doppelgangers, and every single doppelganger could actually be treated as the original. Furthermore, they could all be sacrificed. Anyways, forming another doppelganger would only be the issue of spending a little time. The Empress failed in her first attempt to strike the heaven and earth, and so a doppelganger had died in her place, while the main body was completely uninjured. She's a fucking freak. Fu Xiaoyun was incredibly shocked. Because she was the most outstanding descendant of her clan, she had only received a boost through her ancestor having expended his own life force for her, which life force could die in her place once. But what kind of existence was the ancestor of the Fu clan? A supreme elite of the immortal palace tier. Furthermore, it could not be accomplished by just any ordinary immortal palace tier, but he had to be a big shot among immortal palace tiers. How did this woman manage to do the same? Could it be that she also had a 3-star force as her backing? No, the crux of the matter now was to sever her mortal bonds first. She could consider this question later in the future. Fu Xiaoyun hurriedly gathered her thoughts. She no longer had any means for a replacement to die for her, so the next time she severed her mortal bonds, she definitely had to succeed. There was definitely no second chance for her any longer. Pooh! But just at this time, she saw the Empress spurt out blood madly for the second time, her body having exploded again, and then she reappeared, completely fine. A muscle twitched in her cheek, she was completely speechless with shock. This woman was again breaking through to the severing mundane tier, but she had still failed. However, she actually had a secret technique in which a replacement would die for her. Which clan was she actually a descendant of to actually have as many as 2 secret techniques that could die in her place? Fu Xiaoyun was confused again. In this area, the Fu clan was the absolute ruler, and only the Fu clan had immortal palace tier elites, but now an unknown woman actually looked to be even wealthier than she was. How could this not make her disconcerted? She forcibly steadied her attention, but not too long later, she saw the woman throw up blood for the 3rd time, and die again. This time, she was completely numb. Even if someone told her that the Empress was actually the descendant of a celestial king, she would probably be able to accept it with a peaceful heart. Pooh! The sound of blood being spat out rang out again, but this time, it was not the Empress, but rather Ling Han. Fu Xiaoyun watched. Ling Han was not like the Empress whereby he had a secret technique that allowed a replacement to die in his place, but what astonished her even more was that Ling Han actually just wiped away the trace of blood at the corner of his lips, and even showed a sliver of a smile. Then, he began once more to break through. You! Fu Xiaoyun's small mouth was slightly agape, herself feeling that everything was so surreal. Ling Han discovered that Fu Xiaoyun was staring at him, and couldn't help but ask, "Are you all right?" "Of course I am fine, but the question here is why are you fine as well?" Fu Xiaoyun felt like she was about to go nuts. Chapter 1735, Striking Heaven and Earth. Fu Xiaoyun felt an urge to rush forwards and give Ling Han a beating. "Do you know just how much of a freak you are? That guy had definitely failed in severing Mundane just now, but after he spat out a mouthful of blood, He seemed like he was perfectly fine. Was he even human? "I'm all right," she said in a daze. "Oh." Ling Han nodded, and did not pay her any more regard as he continued to break through. He had indeed failed in severing Mundane once, and was struck by the heaven and earth instead. But his physique was too tough, so he actually received only minor injuries from the blow. However, this backlash from heaven and earth would be more serious as time passed on. Even if his physique was tough, he could not be rash. Otherwise, in another 2 or 3 times, he would definitely be counterkilled. However, with the experience gained from this failure, he could already see hope of attaining the severing Mundane tier. With such a comparison, the Empress was still more awesome than him. She had 9 doppelgangers that could die in her place, and could fail a total of 9 times. The area once again returned to silence. Everyone was attempting to break through, and was extremely focused. They did not have the leisure to be distracted. Another 5 days later, a cry rang out from Bei Xianming, and he suddenly shot up. His aura had suddenly soared greatly, and 2 divine blades were shooting from his eyes. Regulations entwined around him, filled with a sacred aura. He showed a smile of satisfaction. This second severance was again a flawless severance. Which also meant that he could maintain being invincible on the level of second severance. Even if he encountered an opponent in the peak stage of second severance now, he had nothing to fear. He had enough confidence that he would be able to defeat him. Of course, if the other party was also a flawless severance, then that would have to depend on the celestial techniques, martial arts techniques, and other areas that both sides had grasped. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden opened her eyes, took one look at him, and closed her eyes again. The other 3 people were all at the innermost depths of comprehension, and aside from automatically counterattacking if they were attacked, there was absolutely no possibility that they would be alerted by any movement. Quang, thunderclouds gathered densely in the skies. Even in this kind of mystery realm of heaven and earth, the heavenly tribulation would still come as it desired. Bei Xianming was not worried enduring the heavenly tribulation here would affect Fu Xiaoyun. The heavenly tribulation was actually the fairest existence in this world. As long as you did not take the initiative to trifle with it, then even if you were standing by the side of the person undergoing the heavenly tribulation, you would be completely fine. The terrifying heavenly tribulation descended, and Bei Xianming stepped out. He only had to survive this heavenly tribulation, and he would be a genuine second severance Grand Elder. With his age, this kind of second severance elite would be considered a prodigy even in the top-tier great sections. Of course, it was still regretful that he had not been able to strike the heaven and earth, but how many people in this world would actually be capable of attaining severing Mundane tier with the alternative method? They were all descendants from Celestial King tier-level forces. Half a day later, he had withstood the heavenly tribulation. Then, he looked towards Fu Xiaoyun, and could see an expression of conflict and struggle appear on her pretty face. A frightening aura of great Tao was spreading out, forming a divine saber behind her, and looked right about to strike down. Bei Xianming couldn't help but be astonished. This meant having failed in severing Mundane, and she was about to receive a backlash from the heaven and earth. This was a blade of heaven's will. Anyone who was struck would be dead, and there was definitely no one that could survive. Right at this moment, Fu Xiaoyun's eyes suddenly snapped open. Boom! Blazing light shot out from her eyes, and her aura was soaring millions and millions times over in an instant. She had achieved the severing Mundane tier. Bei Xianming was dazed before realization dawned on him. Fu Xiaoyun had failed in striking the heaven and earth, but at the point of life or death, she had still grabbed hold of the chance and delivered a strike on herself, and had thus avoided the calamity of death, advancing into the severing Mundane tier. Fu Xiaoyun showed a hint of pain, tears streaming from her eyes. She had already severed the mortal bond that she valued the most, and that was her love for her parents. From now onwards, her parents were still her parents, but they could no longer have any sort of influence on her. Compared with strangers, the 2 of them would only have the additional label of her parents. This was only a mere instant. Now that her mortal bond had been severed, she immediately became cold and heartless, as if she had never experienced this emotion. The heavenly tribulation that had just dispersed gathered once more, blasting out towards Fu Xiaoyun. Though Bei Xianming was only in the second severance, he could only sit down and watch at present. He swept an eye over Ling Han and his group, and showed a sliver of killing intent. If he killed Ling Han and his group now, Fu Xiaoyun would not be able to stop him in the nick of time. Forget it. He shook his head internally. Though she would not be able to stop it in time, she would still see it. He had no wish to be hated by his goddess for the sake of a few worms, even if it was just a little resentment. Half a day later, Fu Xiaoyun successfully underwent the heavenly tribulation and descended swiftly. Bei Xianming hurriedly approached and asked, "Sister Yun, how is it?" "A flawless severance," Fu Xiaoyun replied calmly. After she had severed her bond with her parents, this still had a great effect on her, causing her personality to become considerably colder than before. "Congratulations, Sister Yun," Bei Xianming said with a smile. He did not care which mortal bond Fu Xiaoyun had severed. A flawless severance meant that she was worthy of him. Furthermore, if Fu Xiaoyun had accomplished severing Mundane through the alternative method, he would feel mentally unbalanced, feeling that she was superior to him. But as for now, he thought that it was perfect. "Let's go." Fu Xiaoyun swept a glance over Ling Han and the Empress. She did not think that these two people would be able to successfully strike at the heaven and earth. In the end, they would also suffer the same fate that she had, being forced to deliver the strike on themselves. If they forcibly struck out at the heaven and earth, they would only die. Since that was the case, she naturally would not be bothered to waste any more time. Bei Xianming was a little unwilling. Actually, he very much wanted to kill Ling Han, but after Fu Xiaoyun advanced into the severing Mundane tier, she was as cold and proud as a queen, which actually affected him slightly. He subconsciously did not want to disobey her. The two of them took out the wooden raft, and left with the flow of the water. "I will not kill you, but you will not be able to survive severing Mundane either, anyways." Bei Xianming looked back at Ling Han. He had not succeeded in severing Mundane even after so many days. That basically meant that he would not be successful. Even if he did not make a move, Ling Han would still be killed by the heaven and earth. He withdrew his gaze, no longer taking this little ant to heart. He was a king tier and prodigy, so what need was there for him to hate anyone? The couple left swiftly, and only then did the heavenly phoenix divine maiden breathe out in relief. She kept worrying that Bei Xianming would suddenly make a move. "It's all right. I have been keeping an eye out," Ling Han suddenly spoke up, a smile appearing upon his lips. One should never be careless. Putting aside Bei Xianming, he did not even trust Fu Xiaoyun. Thus, though they were all severing their mortal bonds here, Ling Han had kept a sliver of divine sense alert all this time. If they suddenly rose up and attacked, he would take the three of them into the Black Tower at the first instant. Thankfully, though Bei Xianming had repeatedly thought of making a move on them, he ultimately did not put it into action. With the two of them having left, Ling Han finally could concentrate fully on severing his mortal bonds. Delivering a strike onto heaven and earth was too difficult. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 62nd day since they had entered into the severing Mundane pool, and there was only less than 1/3 of the time left until the severing Mundane pool would close. At the same time, a powerful aura seeped out of Ling Han and the Empress, turning into multiple divine blades. Then, they gradually merged, and ultimately became a massive divine saber that struck out at the heaven and earth. Striking back at the heaven and earth. Quang, with the blade having struck, it clearly did not strike anything solid, but an endless echo burst out from the heaven and earth. Hong, long, long, the heaven and earth resonated, and there was thunder rumbling, as if the heaven and earth itself was raging. Striking at the heaven and earth was a rebellion against the heaven and earth, so the heaven and earth would naturally be raging. Yet the heavenly phoenix divine maiden's expression showed her joy. This meant that Ling Han and the Empress were close to success. Chapter 1736, Severing Mundane Tier. Strike after strike, Ling Han and the Empress struck faster and faster. Hong, long, long, the thunder also became more intense and rapid, as if wanting to scare off Ling Han and the Empress so that they would immediately stop such treasonous actions. But how could Ling Han and the Empress possibly care? The whole life of a cultivator was spent on defying the heavens and changing their fate, so why did they have to adhere to heaven's will instead when they were severing Mundane? Strike! 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 Boom! A loud bang rang out, yet it was not heard by the ear, but rather exploded in the mind. Every single person in the severing Mundane pool felt their minds shake. Those who were about to fail in severing Mundane before had actually thus gotten back on the right track. They did not know what had happened, and only thought that this was a blessing from the heavens. All of them were incredibly surprised and overjoyed. This was because Ling Han and the Empress were about to successfully deliver a strike onto the heaven and earth, which had caused a mysterious change in destiny, and led to the strike of severing Mundane become considerably much easier. Of course, destiny was variable and indefinite, so this strike might become extremely difficult the next time. Ling Han and the Empress opened their eyes at the same time. A powerful aura surged out from them, directly shooting up into the skies. Wang, this kind of aura took the form of two pillars of light, and even those outside the severing Mundane pool could clearly see this. What's going on here? A great many people were waiting outside, and there were still others that had retreated back out midway through. Additionally, there was a very small number that had already completed severing Mundane, and came back out. A severing Mundane tear produced from striking the heaven and earth had never happened before, at least not in the vicinity of a 3-star force. Thus, none of these people knew that this was reaching the severing Mundane tear through the alternative method, and an unknown change had taken place in the heaven and earth. On the island at the lake center, tribulation clouds began to gather densely, and the heavenly tribulation built up once more. Ling Han and the Empress stood on opposing sides of the island so that they would not accidentally be pulled into each other's heavenly tribulation. This heavenly tribulation was extremely terrifying. They had struck the heaven and earth instead to succeed, and this was not permitted by the latter, because they had severed their connection with it, and they would no longer be under the control of the heaven and earth from now on. The heaven and earth would try their best to destroy such an existence. But even so, the heavenly tribulation still had to adhere to certain rules. At least, it could not possibly send out a divine punishment on the level of dividing soul tier. Otherwise, there would be no one in this world that could survive. The might of the heavenly tribulation was comparable to a second severance elite. Unfortunately, Ling Han and the Empress had both cultivated to the true pinnacle level of the Eternal River tier, and this meant that after they advanced into the severing Mundane tier, they would be invincible kings among their peers. And now that they had successfully struck the heaven and earth, these two advantages stacked up, allowing them to be invincible even against an opponent superior to them by a whole cultivation level. Second severance elite? Piece of cake. They blasted back at the heavenly tribulation. Ling Han was even more hardcore. He took the initiative to guide the heavenly tribulation into his body to temper his godly bones. Half a day later, the two of them stopped at almost the exact same time. They exchanged a look, and could see the confidence that came from being invincible in each other's gaze. A flawless severance, they both declared. Even if it was delivering a strike onto heaven and earth, there was still a difference in quality. This strike could be a light blow or a heavy blow. Ling Han and the Empress had completely severed their connection with the heaven and earth, without the slightest lingering trace left behind. This was what ensured that they could still have invincible battle prowess even against a foe that was superior by a minor level. But it also brought a problem, and that was it would become incredibly difficult for them to comprehend Great Tao in future because since they had severed their bond with the heaven and earth, they would also be incompatible with the Great Tao of heaven and earth, so successfully comprehending it would be too difficult. Thankfully, they had the reincarnation tree, which could completely compensate for this shortcoming. Moreover, severing Mundane tears possessed an unlimited lifespan in theory. I should go retrieve that source water, Ling Han said with a smile. Now that he had waited until he attained the severing Mundane tier to go underwater, he actually had more confidence. The might of the 9 heavens flame was completely corresponding with his own cultivation level. The stronger he was, the stronger the nine heavens flame would be, and this was the flame of his life force. "I'll wait for you," the Empress said tenderly. Her tenderness would eternally bloom for only one man. Ling Han's heart involuntarily soared. He nodded, and said, "The two of you wait here, I shouldn't take too long." If he could retrieve it, he would, but if he couldn't, he would not force the issue, either. He could always come back in the future. The two women nodded. Because they knew that Ling Han possessed the Black Tower, they were not very worried. Ling Han channeled the nine heavens flame. Boom, the blazing white flames appeared all around his body, and one could clearly see patterns of great Tao rippling among the flames. It was the manifestation of regulations, exuding a might that would even cause a dividing soul-tier elite fear. At present, the nine heavens flame had also advanced into celestial level, and from celestial level onwards, its might could finally be reflected fully. Ling Han wrapped himself in the nine heavens flame, and suddenly jumped into the lake waters. If this scene was seen by others, they would definitely exclaim that he was a maniac. Wasn't he just seeking death? But in the next instant, they would be dumbfounded because the lake waters were actually unable to corrode Ling Han's body due to his body being wrapped by the nine heavens flame. The nine heavens flame resisted the power of the source water. This was not a resistance of cultivation level, but an exchange of blows in terms of level. One was an ancestral flame, and the other was a source water. They were both entities that represented the most basic life force of the celestial realm. In terms of level, neither was superior to the other. The rule of weakening and support among the five elements did not apply here. On the level of life force, every single regulation was actually equal, just like how time regulation was noble and lofty before one had reached Celestial King tier, but once one had truly reached Celestial King tier, it was not actually all that stronger than wood, fire, and other regulations. Thus, the nine heavens flame would not be hindered by the source water. Ling Han dived deep into the lake, but this great lake was frighteningly deep. He dived for a whole 2 days and 2 nights, but he had still not reached the bottom. When he looked down, it was still completely dark, as if there was no bottom to the lake. Ling Han calculated the time. At most, he could only dive for another 8 days. He would definitely have to swim back up by then. Otherwise, he, the Empress, and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden could not possibly manage to leave the severing mundane power before the 3 months' time was up. And by then, the violent power of the heaven and earth would explode, and even a celestial king would frown at that. They would only be able to spend the next 10 million years inside the Black Tower. How could that be allowed? 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. When the 6th day came, Ling Han finally reached the bottom, and with the guidance of Small Tower, he discovered a cave at the bottom of the lake. After he entered, the water level was actually slowly decreasing. Finally, it actually became a stream, and he could walk beside it. Even without the nine heavens flame protecting his body, there was no need to worry that he would be corroded by the lake waters. Another half a day later, a small pond appeared ahead of him. There was an expanse of water in the pond, but it was slightly wriggling like a jellyfish. And by the side of the pond, there was actually a person sprawled out. This stream was formed precisely from the aura that was flowing out of him. Ling Han couldn't help but be stunned. This person's aura actually turned into a river that would make even a celestial king frown, so how powerful was this person? I actually guessed wrongly, Small Tower spoke up. That is a celestial king who clearly came here to collect the source water, but did not succeed. Instead, he died here, and his aura turned into the river of regulations. Aside from a celestial king, only one who has grasped the life force of the heaven and earth could make it to this place. Ling Han nodded, but then his expression darkened, and he almost jumped up in indignation. So as it turned out, you weren't exactly sure, yet still had me jump into a hellhole? This guy said that the nine heavens flame could resist the source water, but this fuck wasn't even the source water, but rather the regulations of a celestial king. Chapter 1737, The Celestial King Appears Again. Ho ho. Small Tower laughed. Ling Han was driven mad for a while, but could do nothing. This small tower looked completely unaffected, so what could he do to it? Go and take a look at that celestial king, Small Tower urged him. Logically, even if a celestial king cannot collect the source water, he shouldn't have died either. He should have been able to retreat safely. Ling Han was also curious. He slowly approached, and with the burning of the 9 heavens flame, he was able to resist the pressure of a celestial king. Otherwise, he couldn't have possibly come here at all. He would have long since been killed by the corrosion of the lake waters. This celestial king was male, and wore purple and golden robes. They should have been woven from incredibly high-quality materials, but due to the endless corrosion of the aura of a celestial king, they were already worn out and torn, and could no longer be used. He was totally different from other human beings. There was a vertical eye on his forehead, but it had been stabbed by someone, and this had also been a fatal blow, directly penetrating his mind and destroying his spirit. Ling Han couldn't help but feel rueful. So what if one was as strong as a celestial king? He could still encounter a powerful foe, and be unable to escape the fate of death. There are words on the ground. By the side of this celestial king's right hand, there were several patterns inscribed. When Ling Han looked over, a telepathic message instantly flashed in his mind, speaking of some matters in a disjointed manner in the form of a thought. Ling Han couldn't help but feel stunned. It was only a few patterns, and they could actually transmit so much. As expected of a celestial king, this technique was too astonishing. This celestial king was known as the Multitude Beast Celestial King when he had been alive. The Multitude Beast Celestial King cultivated the great Tao of water, and invented his own Celestial King technique, which could turn the water regulations into battle beasts. When he battled, there would be a stampede of wild beasts, and each of them would possess battle prowess that was equal to his cultivation level. However, what was most frightening was the 10 battle beasts that he reared. Not only was their power equal to his, their battle prowess was only that slight bit inferior to his own. Through this Celestial King technique, he could claim to be invincible among the second heaven celestial kings. Unfortunately, he had encountered a very strong foe, the Imperial Void Celestial King, and his spirit had been destroyed by the latter. However, a celestial king was still a celestial king, after all. Even if he was only left with an empty shell, the Multitude Beast Celestial King had still come here, hoping to collect the source water of heaven and earth, and develop his spirit again through its nurturing. He was a celestial king that had succeeded through the water regulations, and thus there was indeed a sliver of possibility that this was theoretically possible. However, he ultimately failed, and collapsed at the last step. Those that can become celestial kings are all supreme prodigies that have stood out among the rest in the long passage of history, and all of them are king tiers. Ling Han sighed. No wonder he was so unwilling to die. But why is it the Imperial Void Celestial King again? In the past, the Celestial King ancestor of the Qing clan disappeared without a trace after the great battle erupting due to ideological differences, and the Qing clan was massacred by another Celestial King, and that was the Imperial Void Celestial King. If it had to be said that there were 2 Celestial Kings in the Celestial Realm that simultaneously were named Imperial Void, Ling Han would definitely not believe that. This was the same Celestial King. This Celestial King is really quite active. Just how many Celestial Kings has he killed? Could it be that he is a Celestial King killer? Ling Han mumbled to himself. He searched through his memories. Previously, the Multitude Beast Celestial King had transmitted a great many memories to him, but they were all broken up, and the information was not very complete. Imperial Void Celestial King. Sealed Emotion Palace. Sealed Emotion Heavenly Venerable. Ling Han rubbed his chin. The information about the Imperial Void Celestial King was extremely limited, but he seemed to have a very strong connection with the words Sealed Emotion. Did he come from the Sealed Emotion Palace? However, what the hell is the Sealed Emotion Heavenly Venerable, then? Don't speak his name. Small Tower suddenly called out, appearing to be incredibly stirred up. Why? Ling Han did not understand. Never, ever recite the true name of a heavenly venerable tier, or it will attract his divine sense. Even with how expansive the celestial realm is, his divine sense will immediately manifest, and can reach anywhere in the celestial realm. Small Tower stated, its tone more serious than it had ever been. Ling Han curled his lips and said, "This is only a bestowed name, I don't know his real name." Small Tower was still very stirred up, and warned him repeatedly. It was best not to speak of even the bestowed name. Otherwise, if the person just happened to spontaneously make a prediction on a whim, he would still be able to see everything clearly. "Hey, just who is this guy? I have never seen you so excited before?" Ling Han asked curiously. "There is no need for you to know now. You only have to work hard on cultivation. Furthermore, forget about this incident, it does not have the slightest benefit for you." Small Tower warned. Ling Han chuckled, and said, "You should know I have always been a very curious person. The more you say this, the more I want to know." Ling Han. Small Tower's voice rose in volume. "Don't play around with fire. Otherwise, even if I take the risk of self-destruction of both tool and spirit, I will not be able to save you." "So serious?" Ling Han's expression finally became solemn, and he asked, "All right, I won't ask now. But you at least have to tell me when I will be qualified to know the truth." Small Tower paused, and replied, "Celestial King tier. Only a Celestial King would be qualified to know the truth." Hiss. Ling Han nodded, and said, "All right, then we'll speak again of this matter after I become a Celestial King." He had already advanced into the Severing Mundane tier, and began his path in the Celestial level. Becoming a Celestial King was only a matter of time, that was how confident he was. "Now, how do I go about collecting the source water?" he asked. Small Tower rose up slightly, and said, "That is the Xianin source water of the 9 great source waters, the coldest and furthermost on the Yin scale. Wrap yourself in the 9 heavens flame, and then try to form a resonance with it. Right, you can also try channeling the indestructible heavens scroll. Next, it's all up to luck. If the Xianin source water approves of you, it will take the initiative to enter into your body and become a power of your life force. Otherwise, the Xianin source water will break through this space and leave to seek another hiding spot." Ling Han nodded. He channeled the 9 heavens flame once more, and walked towards that pond. When he had walked a few steps nearer, he immediately discovered that the temperature here was beginning to drop at a maddening pace, but the Xianin source water was actually still in liquid form. This scene would really make anyone click their tongue in amazement. In this place, the patterns of Great Tao were interwoven. They were on the level of Celestial King tier, and if it was not for the fact that Ling Han still had the protection of the 9 heavens flame, he would be instantly crushed. He walked very slowly. Even with the help of the 9 heavens flame, if his movements were slightly stronger, the patterns of Great Tao would still be able to rip through the defenses of the 9 heavens flame, and destroy his physical body and soul. Finally, he arrived at the side of the pond. That jellyfish-like object seemed to have its own awareness. It looked like it was shrinking back, and even seemed like it was about to fly off. Ling Han hurriedly channeled the indestructible heaven scroll. The life force of the heaven and earth could not be collected forcefully. At least, he would not be able to do so with his current strength. Thus, he could only drink it directly. Come on then. Once the indestructible heaven scroll was channeled, golden light immediately flickered on Ling Han's body, but this was different from before. The images of immortal phoenix, heaven dragons, black tortoise, giant golden ants, and others were clearly seen. These were all immortal beasts, and they were all of the Celestial King tier. The indestructible heaven scroll was a cultivation technique that had been drawn from the life force of these Celestial King creatures, and further fused with the comprehension of a supreme great elite, being formed by keeping what was valuable and rejecting what was worthless. The Xianin source water immediately calmed down. It clearly had no eyes, but Ling Han had a feeling that it was presently staring at that black tortoise. That was the 1,000 transformations tortoise, water element. Xiao, with a flash, the Xianin source water had arrived in the palm of Ling Han's hand. Then, it squeezed in, and traveled from Ling Han's palm all the way upwards, through his palm and reaching his shoulder, then taking a turn downwards, and it reached his heart, and then his dantian. And in this process, Ling Han's body was completely encased in ice. Chapter 1738, Refining Source Water. The Xianin source water was the coldest and most water in the world. Though it was attracted by Ling Han, or rather attracted by the 1,000 transformations tortoise of the indestructible heaven scroll, and entered into his body, it was not the slightest bit docile. Wherever it passed, it would completely freeze that part of Ling Han's body. Thankfully, Ling Han's body still contained the presence of the 9 heavens flame, which could resist the Xianin source water, and safeguard Ling Han's life force. Otherwise, even if the Xianin source water had no intention to kill him, it would still destroy every single bit of his life force in this process, and Ling Han would really die for nothing. Within Ling Han's dantian, the 2 great life forces of the heaven and earth were presently engaging in a fierce competition. The 9 heavens flame had solely monopolized Ling Han's dantian at first, but with the intervention of the Xianin source water, it, too, wanted to occupy a place. This naturally caused the 2 of them to begin a fight. I would not be subdued by you, and neither were you willing to yield to me. And with that, Ling Han naturally would be suffering. Both of them were bosses, and in their essence, they were existences that could match celestial kings. If they really flew into a rage, Ling Han would definitely be insta-killed. Now that the 2 of them were clashing, the slightest bit of power that seeped out was incredibly frightening, causing Ling Han's body to be horribly unfortunate. After advancing into the severing mundane tier, Ling Han's physique naturally improved further, and was close to the height of 2-star pseudo-divine metal. In the celestial realm, there were only a total of 10 levels of pseudo-divine metal. 2-star pseudo-divine metal was actually comparable to the level of 3rd severance. Similarly, 3-star pseudo-divine metal would have leaped to the level of Yang soul tier. But this kind of physique was not even worth a mention in the face of 2 great life forces. Instantly, Ling Han felt like he was about to break down from the torture he was going through. He hurriedly entered into the Black Tower, wanting to use the power of the Black Tower to suppress these 2 guys. At least it would be able to slightly ease the agony, so it would not be so painful. Wang, the Black Tower also began to exude power, aiming to suppress these 2 life forces of the heaven and earth. The 9 heavens flame was fine. In the first place, it was a part of Ling Han's body, and under the suppression of the Black Tower, not only did it not resist, it helped the Black Tower to suppress the Xianin source water together. But the Xianin source water was the life force of the heaven and earth, so how could it be easily tamed? It began a fierce resistance. It wanted to monopolize Ling Han's dantian. This was the pride that belonged to a life force of the heaven and earth. How could it be that it would be willing to share its lair with another? Ling Han unleashed his full power, and began to refine the Xianin source water. Only by turning it into a part of his own body would he make it no longer resist the 9 heavens flame from sharing the same space as it did. But even if he had the help of the Black Tower and the 9 heavens flame, wanting to suppress the Xianin source water was still incredibly difficult. This was a precious treasure on the level of Celestial King tier, so how could it be subdued so easily? This was a tug of war. Ling Han slowly refined the Xianin source water, and his body was continuously freezing over. At first it was a bank of ice, and now it turned into a mountain of ice that wrapped him tightly within. Ling Han was not worried. Refining the Xianin source water was presently ongoing in a methodical and organized manner. As long as he succeeded, he would be able to easily melt this mountain of ice. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Time was continuously passing. When it was the 5th day, Ling Han's eyes suddenly snapped open. Ka, ka, ka. Suddenly, innumerable cracks appeared on the mountain of ice before it shattered with a bang. Ling Han's figure shook, and he walked out from among the broken shards of ice. Wherever his feet passed, those shards of ice would actually turn into water automatically, and they would be then absorbed into his body. the Xianin source water had already turned into his own life force. Thus, he had also become the source of all the waters of this world. Of course, it was limited by his cultivation level. Whether it was the nine heavens flame or the Xianin source water, their might was restricted, but as long as Ling Han's cultivation level increased, the two life forces' might would naturally rise accordingly. What kind of concept was this? After Ling Han became a celestial king, it would be equivalent to him having fused two celestial kings within his body, and his battle prowess would be so strong that it could not be described. I have really gotten a great gain this time. Ling Han showed a hint of a smile. Aside from perfectly advancing to the severing mundane tier, he had also obtained the core secret of a celestial king technique. In the future, when his cultivation level met the requirements, he would be able to form 10 battle beasts, and finally it was the Xianin source water. Most importantly, this secret technique of the multitude beast celestial king was extremely creative because he could also fuse his own life force into the bodies of immortal beasts. The multitude beast celestial king did not obtain any life forces of the heaven and earth like the ancestral flame and source water, but being able to become a celestial king, his own life force should not be inferior to the life force of the heaven and earth. Both of them were equal. Thus, he had embedded a portion of his own life force into the bodies of his battle beasts so that the might of the battle beasts would be extraordinarily astonishing. But the problem was that the multitude beast celestial king would also lose a portion of his own life force, which would lead to the weakening of his own battle prowess. And precisely because of this, the multitude beast celestial king had ventured to seek out the source water of heaven and earth, which matched the life force that he cultivated. Firstly, refining it would increase his might, and secondly, it was also possible that he could gain the approval of the life force of the heaven and earth. He had indeed found the Xianin source water, but because of various reasons, he did not manage to collect it in time. Right after he had been killed by the Imperial Void Celestial King, his battered body had finally come here to retrieve the Xianin source water, yet he had ultimately not succeeded. But Ling Han did not have this problem. Merely with the fact that he now possessed two types of life force of the heaven and earth, after he learnt this celestial technique, its might would far surpass its creators. Ling Han couldn't help but mumble to himself, if I could obtain more kinds of life force of the heaven and earth in future, just how awesome would I become? If you have a chance, try to gather as many types of life force of the heaven and earth as possible before advancing into the celestial king tier. Small Tower suddenly piped up. Is there anything I need to pay particular attention to? Ling Han asked. The more kinds of life force of the heaven and earth you get, the more life force you will be able to absorb after you advance into Celestial King tier. This will increase your battle prowess extremely, and there is still a chance for you to break through to become a 9-heaven celestial source. Otherwise, the difficulty level would be too high if you merely relied on your own effort, Small Tower explained solemnly. So that's how it is. Ling Han nodded. He would remember all this clearly. Now, though, he had to leave this place. Calculating the time, it should be about time. When he left, he still had to use the 9 heavens flame or the Xianin source water to resist the corrosive powers of the aura of the Celestial King. 8 days later, he burst through the water's surface. Ling Han. The Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden both sighed in relief. Ling Han had disappeared for 20 days. And even if they were filled in confidence in Ling Han, it was still inevitable that they would be worried. Only at this moment when they saw him reappear did they finally release the breath that they had been holding. Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, I've made you two worry. Let's go. Where's the source water? The Empress asked. Wang. With a wave of Ling Han's hand, an extraordinarily icy aura instantly descended, completely freezing over even the air in the surroundings. In this territory, Ling Han was undoubtedly the ruler of ice. Seeing this scene, both the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden were shocked. They took out the wooden raft, and began their return journey. This time, Ling Han sped up the progress of the wooden raft. The time limit of 3 months was almost up. The flow of the river was becoming more rapid and violent. Occasionally, there would be splashes of waves, and if one was touched even the slightest, it was guaranteed that even a celestial king would frown. That was because this was the regulations of a two-heaven celestial king, and their power would not decrease just because he had died. Thankfully, Ling Han presently had grasped two kinds of life force of the heaven and earth, which was enough to resist this power. After all, this was also a celestial king that had long since died. The river water's strength lay in the regulations, and not in genuine battle prowess. A few days later, they finally exited the Severing Mundane pool. At this time, almost everyone had left, and it was basically impossible that those that had not yet left the Severing Mundane pool by now would appear again. Ling Han. A voice filled with killing intent rang out. A fair-skinned, unbearded elder was directing a deadly glare at the three of them. Ding Xing, a Severing Mundane ancestor of the Ding clan, second severance. Chapter 1739, Crushed by Regulations. Since Ling Han vanished, the Ding clan had been searching for his whereabouts all this while. However, the celestial realm was too big, and the Ding clan was only a one-star force. Even in Dark Moon City, they did not have full power, what more when they were out of Dark Moon City. Thus, they could only guess a few locations where they could possibly find him, such as Black Moon City, the Severing Mundane Pool, or other locations for Severing Mundane. Perhaps, even if Ling Han wanted to sever Mundane, he would not dare to go to the Severing Mundane Pool. Knowing that the Ding clan was watching out for him, he might switch to another place. There were only over a dozen Severing Mundane ancestors in the Ding clan. Furthermore, they could not turn out in full force either. What if the other two clans took advantage of the opening and robbed them? If there was a chance, they were sure that the Duan clan and Long clan would definitely not be reserved. Ding Yaolong had to stay back as overseer. As for Ding Shan and Ding Song, one of them had gone to Black Moon City, while the other had gone to the Han clan. Even if Han Lu had torn the Ding clan's ancestral shrine apart, the Ding clan still had to send someone over to give an explanation, which would resolve their misunderstanding with the Han clan once and for all. There were too few elites, so only Ding Xing alone had come to the Severing Mundane Pool. Because if Ling Han wanted to sever the Mundane, there were only those few places where he could do so. The Ding clan knew that Ling Han was freakish. Once he broke through to the Severing Mundane, it was extremely possible that even a first severance Grand Elder would be no match for him. Thus, the one standing guard here was Ding Xing. A second severance. A second severance against a first severance, and one that had just broken through at that. If the matter still could not be resolved, what justice was there left in this world? Ling Han glanced at Ding Xing. Though he did not know his name, he had seen this person at the Ding clan's ancestral shrine before. Recalling the Ding clan's ancestral shrine, Ling Han couldn't help but ask, are the repairs of your ancestral shrine done? Fuck. Ding Xing's self-control was definitely excellent. Among those who could cultivate to the level of the Severing Mundane tier, just which one of them had not experienced innumerable storms, and wasn't a person who would not show their emotions? But when Ling Han said these words, Ding Xing immediately wanted to leap up in fury. You actually have the nerve to ask? Evil brat, if it were not for you, how could the ancestral shrine of our Ding clan have been torn apart? He couldn't help but roar loudly, his eyes bulging in fury. You're already so old, yet you still do not know how to cultivate your moral and mental character. Shouting and screaming so loudly, what if you disturb kids? Ling Han asked with a grin. He did not mind making things worse for the Ding clan and pouring salt on their wounds. The members of your clan have done so many misdeeds, so what is the point of worshipping the memorial tablets of those villains? A crooked stick will have a crooked shadow. Die. Initially, Ding Xing had planned to put on airs of superiority so that Ling Han would fully feel the pressure of impending death, but he had exploded in fury when they had just barely exchanged a few words. He could not stop himself from stretching out a hand to press down on Ling Han. Ling Han had not moved, and the Empress was the first to move. She had just broken through to the Severing Mundane tier, and was presently eager to try out her new strength. Shua, a flash of sword light streaked out, dazzling the 9 heavens. Ding Xing's expression changed drastically, and the large hand he had stretched out immediately withdrew. If that flash of sword light struck him, the regulations of heaven and earth would lash back, and he would be injured. As for how severe his injuries would be, he was unsure. But he did not dare try. What if it was a powerful attack? He felt lingering fear. Aside from those limited few that he had come across, there had never been anyone else that could make him feel immense pressure and fear that he would lose if he fought with just a single move. He knew this woman. She was Ling Han's companion. Previously, she was only in the Genesis tier, but was now in the Severing Mundane tier. This meant that she had just successfully severed the Mundane, and also meant that she was only a first severance. He was a second severance. The Empress was not going to be merciful. She charged out, and began a merciless offensive against Ding Xing. Ding Xing could not do anything, and could only parry. But after they had exchanged blows, his disadvantageous position was really too clear. He vaguely showed a hint of dropping into a disadvantage. This was not unusual. The Empress had already cultivated to the true pinnacle level of the Eternal River tier. This meant that she only had to break through to the Severing Mundane tier, and she would be invincible among her peers. Furthermore, she had struck the heaven and earth, and had advanced into the Severing Mundane tier through a flawless severance, which made her invincible among her peers again. With these two advantages added together, she would be invincible even against an opponent that was superior to her by a whole minor level. A second severance that could match her would either had to have cultivated to the true pinnacle level of the Eternal River tier, or had to similarly have advanced by striking the heaven and earth. Now, though Ding Xing was superior to her by a minor level, he had not achieved either of these two requirements, and was not a king tier at all. So how could he possibly be able to compete with a king among kings like the Empress? Ding Xing's expression changed to a shocked one, yet he still could not turn the situation around, and was at the brunt of the Empress's blows, his aged face incredibly sullen. The hierarchy of the celestial realm was strict. A second severance was absolutely capable of crushing a first severance. Even if there were occasional appearances of king tiers, surpassing that gap of a whole minor level would result in a tie with a veteran elite at most, and it was utterly impossible that the latter would be overwhelmed. Hiss, why were those people that were with Ling Han all monsters? Ding Xing struck a few more times, his expression becoming uglier and uglier. After he had blocked a few moves, he turned around to flee. No, if they continued, he would die here. Then what was the point of fighting any longer? Furthermore, both Ling Han and the Empress were so freakish, so if they became third severance, wouldn't that mean that even Ding Yaolong would not be able to suppress them? He had to bring this news back so that the three great elites Ding Yaolong, Ding Shan, and Ding Song would move out personally. By now, only they would be capable of suppressing these two freaks. Otherwise, if they were given more time to grow, then it was really possible that the Ding clan would be done for. Why are you in such a rush to leave? We haven't reminisced enough. Ling Han stepped in his path. He had cultivated the secret technique of lightning, so his speed was extraordinarily fast. His whole person turned into a bolt of lightning, capable of cutting off even a second severance Grand Elder. You're courting death. Though Ding Xing had begun to flee, he was still putting on airs of a second severance Grand Elder. He rebuked Ling Han coldly, and waved a hand to deliver a palm strike at the latter. He had cultivated water regulations, and had also used a secret technique in this attack. Ice formed, planning to freeze 1,000 miles around them. Ling Han couldn't help but smile. A competition of regulations with him? You had to cultivate to the third severance, at least, to even be qualified. Boom, he released the 9 heavens flame. Immediately, the flames formed 9 streaks that surged out from his body. Every streak of flame had taken the form of an immortal beast. There were dragons, phoenixes, and vermilion birds, and they were numerous. As the immortal beasts of flame stormed, the coldness immediately retreated, and no longer appeared. A muscle twitched in Ding Xing's cheek. He had not even unleashed his powerful move, yet could no longer follow up on it, His regulations had been hindered, but how could this be possible? No matter how freakish Ling Han's battle prowess was, it was still limited by his cultivation level. How could the comprehension of regulations of a first severance compare to a second severance? But the reality was really that exaggerated. Someone that had just broken through to the first severance actually managed to completely crush a veteran second severance in terms of the height of their regulations. He naturally would not know that this was not the regulations that Ling Han had grasped, but rather that the nine heavens flame was the life force of the heaven and earth itself. And you, a mere second severance, actually dared to compare the height of your regulations with the life force of heaven and earth? Ling Han smiled slightly, and said, "Let me pay you back with a move." He withdrew the nine heavens flame, and channeled out the Xianin source water. Immediately, the high temperature around them that was like a volcano dropped madly. Multiple swords of ice with patterns of great Tao inscribed on them appeared in mid-air, their coldness sinister and frightening. Holy fuck! At this moment, Ding Xing's surprised expression was as if he had just seen a ghost. Water regulations. This was fuck water regulations. Impossible. Ling Han had only just advanced into the first severance, and could at most just barely strengthen one regulation to the height of the severing mundane tier. But not only could Ling Han crush him with fire regulations, his water regulations were also incredibly terrifying, definitely being superior to his own grasp over the water regulations. Where did you get so much time to cultivate? Have you taken the wrong medicine? My heavens, how could it be that such a monster would exist? Chapter 1740, Tower of Three Realms. Ding Xing was shocked, his figure quickly retreating. However, the ice attacked, and his movements became incredibly and extraordinarily slow. The Empress charged over, delivering a palm strike at the air. Pung! Ding Xing's figure immediately exploded into tens of thousands of pieces like an ice carving. Every single shard of ice could clearly be seen, and there was definitely not a single drop of blood spilled. Xianin source water, the coldest existence in this world. However, a second severance Grand Elder would not die so easily. Ding Xing's spirit escaped his body, intending to flee. His spirit took the form of a tiny figure the size of a fist. The moment it left his body, its speed was extremely fast. A spirit that had lost the support of the physical body was a very dangerous thing. A severing mundane tier Grand Elder could not be killed, but his spirit was comparatively more fragile, and it was very easy to be hunted down. What was the purpose of hunting it down? Firstly, it could be directly refined, and one could extract the comprehension of regulations that a cultivator had accumulated throughout his lifetime. Secondly, it could be sealed into some forbidden tool and become a one-time deadly weapon that had incredible might. Additionally, the concoction of some alchemical pills also required a spirit to make up for the shortage of certain regulations. However, the spirit was extremely difficult to capture. Without the burden of the physical body, its speed was astonishingly fast. Having the same lifespan as the heaven and earth, this cultivation level was extremely difficult to reach, but it was likewise very difficult to die. The Empress humphed coldly, and shot out a finger. Xiao, a streak of sword light swept past, its speed even faster. Pa, Ding Xing's spirit was shattered, scattering in all directions like a firework. A second severance elite, dead. The Empress and Ling Han exchanged a look. They were both king tiers among first severance, and if they were still unable to deal with Ding Xing with the two of them joining forces now, that would be really illogical. Let's go find the others first. Who knows if Changsun Liang and the other guys have gotten into a fight, Ling Han said. The three of them left, heading towards Moon Scattering City. Why did the Black Tower not open the 7th floor? Ling Han suddenly thought. I don't know, either. Small Tower was a little dazed. After you advanced into the severing mundane tier, I regained some more memories, but at the same time, I have also gained some new questions. Now, the only thing I can confirm is that I know who I am. Aren't you the Tsundra Tower? You're saying that you know the Black Tower's real name? Ling Han asked. The Black Tower was only a name that he had casually come up with. It appeared to be completely black in color, so this was the name he had given it. In truth, his knowledge of the Black Tower was quite limited. Small Tower nodded. My original name is Tower of Three Realms. Crack. All of a sudden, a clap of thunder rang out, as if the heaven and earth itself were shaking. Ling Han was involuntarily stunned. This should be the reaction that the heavens had towards the words, Tower of Three Realms. For certain objects that could affect the heaven and earth, directly calling out their names would draw a reaction from the heaven and earth. It was said that celestial kings were beings like this. Directly calling out the name of a living celestial king would cause a sudden clap of thunder in the middle of nowhere. But the problem here was that his conversation with Small Tower was only limited to his mind. The Tower of Three Realms, was it really so awesome? Do not think of this name again, and never speak it directly, Small Tower declared solemnly. This will draw the attention of several truly powerful figures, and they could reach this place with a single thought. When the Black Tower had fallen into the lower realm, was it also for the purpose of avoiding the divine sense of these mighty figures? Hold on, the Azura Demon Emperor had said before that the lower realm had long since entered into the immortal realm through opening the sky before, yet had descended back into becoming a small world again. This drew great curiosity from the immortal realm and the netherworld, and that was why the Azura Demon Emperor and innumerable other immortal level elites had entered into various small worlds. Could it be that the Black Tower or the previous owner of the Black Tower thought that throwing the Black Tower into the immortal realm was not enough of an insurance, and had thus deliberately stuffed the Black Tower back to a lower level again? But why did it have to bring a small world along with it? You could have directly entered into a small world, and wouldn't it be more covert? Ling Han asked Small Tower, but Small Tower could not answer any questions. There was no result to be gotten from this exchange, and Ling Han did not waste any more time. The three of them soon returned to Moon Scattering City. Ling Han did not need to deliberately make queries to clearly find out about the major incidents that had happened in these few days, because this was the hottest topic of conversation. Chang Sunliang, Xiao Sheng, Song Ji, Ma Ying, and other young king tiers had all successfully advanced to the Severing Mundane, and they had respectively engaged in several great battles. In the first match, Chang Sunliang vs Xiao Sheng, the result was a tie. In the second match, Song Ji challenged Chang Sunliang, and the result was still a tie. In the third match, Ma Ying and Xiao Sheng battled for 3 days and 3 nights, and the result was that Ma Ying suffered a narrow loss by a single move. Judging from these results, the battle prowess of the top-tier prodigies was quite equal. Even if Ma Ying had a narrow loss, it could also be due to various minor factors, and it could not be claimed that she was really the weakest among the 4 in terms of strength. Furthermore, a spar was different from a life-or-death duel. Everyone definitely had a great many powerful moves that they had not shown. Additionally, some young elites had also popped out. Though they were slightly weaker than Chang Sunliang and the others, they could still be considered prodigies. Furthermore, the path of cultivation was still very long, so they might still have a chance of surpassing Chang Sunliang and the others. These were incidents that had already taken place, and there was still a great event that had not taken place. The Fu clan would be hosting a great banquet tomorrow night, inviting all the prodigies that had successfully broken through in this time's opening of the Severing Mundane pool. Some prodigies were definitely worth recruiting, such as Chang Sunliang, Xiao Sheng, and the others. The Fu clan was not old-fashioned, and would frequently draw young prodigies into the clan, and the prodigies would also be glad to join a 3-star force. Even though there was only the difference of a single star between 2 stars and 3 stars, the gap was practically as wide as the distance between heaven and earth. For example, even if Chang Sunliang was very talented, if he had not been nurtured with the full efforts of a 3-star force, the possibility of him advancing into the Immortal Palace tier was practically zero. The inheritance of cultivation was the fruit of intelligence accumulated over innumerable years by innumerable elites. To break through to a completely new cultivation level through one's own efforts was much, much too difficult. The words king tier only represented talent in cultivation and battle prowess that was invincible amongst one's peers, but did not represent the power of creation. Advancing into a completely new, unknown cultivation level would require creating one's own cultivation technique, and this actually did not have much relation with being a king tier. Thus, everyone wanted to gain a ticket into the Fu clan. There were many people who could go to the Fu clan this time because Ling Han and the Empress had advanced by successfully striking the heaven and earth, leading to a certain change in destiny, which made it relatively easier to advance to the Severing Mundane tier this time round. Those that initially had had no hopes had also successfully reached the Severing Mundane tier by now. Those that initially could only barely step into the Severing Mundane tier were now ordinary Severing Mundane tiers, and there were even a few more that had achieved a flawless severance. However, having a flawless severance was the limit. It was impossible that they could advance to the Severing Mundane tier via the alternative method because of this. In short, there were a total of 272 people that were qualified to attend the celebratory feast of the Fu clan, and each person could bring a partner. The great feast naturally could not be held at the Fu clan residence, that was too far. It was rather going to be hosted in the Sky Mountains outside Moon Scattering City. This was closer to the few cities in the surrounding area, and the Fu clan did not merely want to recruit people under the rule of the Black Moon sect. Ling Han thought that he could go and take a look at the Fu clan residence, and use the resources of the Fu clan to find out the whereabouts of the Rock Palace. Thus, he, the Empress, and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden rested for a day, and made their way to the Sky Mountains as well. There was a tiny stone door at the foot of the mountains, and at the doorway, there was a large mass of people gathered. Some could enter, and the moment they stepped over the threshold of the stone doors, their whole person immediately disappeared. Realization dawned on Ling Han. This was a spatial god tool. However, there were people standing guard at the doorway, and one would first have to show their invitation card to enter. We don't have an invitation card, how are we supposed to enter? The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden asked. Chapter 1741, What should be done without an invitation? We'll just go in like that, Ling Han said with a grin. With one arm around each woman, Ling Han squeezed through the crowd, and strode forwards. Underneath their intimidating bearing, those standing in front of them could only step aside to give way. After all, those that were surrounding the stone doors were only Genesis tiers, hadn't Severing Mundane tiers all entered in earlier? Of course, even if they were Severing Mundane tiers, there were not many people that could withstand Ling Han's aura by now. Invitation card. The man standing guard at the doors was a middle-aged man, and his cultivation level as a Severing Mundane tier was enough to suppress all minor characters that wanted to create trouble. As expected of the Fu clan. They were really rich and imposing, even a mere guard was so lavish as they had directly assigned a Severing Mundane ancestor as a mere guard. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "We have just come out of the Severing Mundane pool, and have not received any invitation card." The middle-aged man cast a look over Ling Han, his eyes filled with doubt. Just come out? The Severing Mundane pool had already closed, and you just so happened to come out right before it closed? He did not believe it. He thought that Ling Han should have long since broken through to the Severing Mundane tier, and had come here to trick them. Because Fu clan only wanted prodigies, it was natural that they would only welcome those king tiers that had advanced to the Severing Mundane tier in the Severing Mundane pool. Otherwise, if they were merely ordinary Severing Mundane tiers, then what was the point of recruiting them? To waste their resources? Not all those who entered today might be able to board the Fu clan's ship. Only those prodigies that could possibly achieve a flawless severance were going to be targets for the Fu clan. Ho ho, without an invitation card, you had best turn back, the middle-aged man said with a smile, but did not turn Ling Han away with harsh words. This was the bearing of a noble clan. Otherwise, the servants that came from smaller clans would instead be even more arrogant. Ling Han was not angered either, and smilingly said, "Please help us inform Miss Fu Xiaoyun." He even had designs on the exquisite fairy of our Fu clan. The middle-aged man showed a hint of displeasure. Fu Xiaoyun was too outstanding. Advancing into the severing mundane tier was only the beginning. In future, her achievement would definitely be at the level of the Immortal Palace tier, and the only question was whether she could become a big shot among Immortal Palace tiers. Was she anyone you could have ideas about? What a shameless toad. Sir, if you continue to be a pest, then don't blame me for being rude, the middle-aged man retorted coldly. Have you heard that? Scram! A proud voice rang out from behind them. Everyone turned and looked over. That was a young man, and his expression was completely one of insufferable arrogance. His name was Ning Hao, and he was a rookie that had just advanced into the severing mundane tier this time. At first, he could only be an ordinary severing mundane tier, but because of the effect of destiny, he had hit a bit of luck. The strike he delivered was very thorough, and he had achieved a flawless severance. This naturally led to him becoming extremely arrogant. What Chang Sunliang and Xiao Sheng? Weren't they all the same as he? They had all achieved a flawless severance. Thus, his self-confidence immediately shot sky high, feeling that he was the strongest prodigy in the present generation. He could tell that both Ling Han and the Empress were severing mundane tiers, but so what? They must have achieved severing mundane tier in some unknown corner, so how could they compare to him, who had achieved a flawless severance? There was also a woman beside him. She was very beautiful, but was also similarly arrogant. Her slender arm was wrapped around Ning Hao's arm, her chin raised so high that her nostrils were almost facing upwards. Ling Han turned his head, frowned, and said, "Do you know how to speak properly? If you don't, then just shut your damn mouth." This. When everyone heard this, they all thought that Ling Han was very aggressive. Though Ning Hao was very arrogant, Ling Han was not going to appear polite either, immediately throwing an insult his way. But it was true, how could anyone being told to scram for no reason feel satisfied? You are courting death. Ning Hao's eyes turned cold, but when his eyes swept over the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, he couldn't help but show a cold smirk and said, "These two beauties, do you want to attend the Fu clan's banquet?" "That would be simple. As long as you two dump that guy, I will take the two of you in." "Brother Hao, then what about me?" The woman beside him immediately leaped up. According to the rules, every guest could only bring a single companion. Ning Hao sneered, and withdrew his arm from her grasp. He coldly retorted, "You can scram now." This kind of woman was only good enough for playing around. Could it be that she expected to become a phoenix by taking advantage of her connection with him? The woman only looked despondent for a while before immediately shrieking, "Ning Hao, how dare you? You are really heartless after you have had your way with me. You will definitely get your just desserts." Ning Hao's expression darkened, and showed killing intent. This woman actually dared to announce the matters between them in public, and actually dared to speak of it in such a crude manner. Get lost. The Empress was furious. Shua, she delivered a palm strike in Ning Hao's direction. Boom, the palm that was akin to white jade swept out, her origin power taking the form of a fine small hand that slapped out towards Ning Hao's face. Ling Han couldn't help but nod. The Empress's control over her power had already reached a very fine level. Though elites would form a giant hand at the slightest inclination, this was because their power was too strong, and after their origin power took form, it naturally would be even bigger and very simple. But to control the size of the hand that had been formed from her origin power to a very small size would require her grasp and control over her own power to reach a very high level. After advancing into the severing mundane tier, the Empress had finally succeeded. A light tap was actually a harsh blow. Ning Hao scoffed. "I only gave you a chance because you have quite a good figure, yet you have forgotten yourself in your arrogance." He, too, sent out a palm strike, which turned into the size of at least a house, greeting the Empress's incoming blow. Just look, this was what true power was, the mighty power that only a flawless severance could possess. Boom, this palm strike of his caused a clap of thunder. A severing mundane ancestor was naturally strong, their regulations glowing, and possessing a supreme aura that mortals could only worship. The Empress threw out a palm strike. Her tiny, jade-like palm sank into the giant hand, just like a grain of rice thrown into the water, completely negligible and without the slightest effect. Yet that was only for an instant. The large hand outside suddenly crumbled, and the regulations also dispersed completely at the first moment. That fine small hand appeared once more, pressing down on Ning Hao, completely unaffected. Instantly, Ning Hao's face turned pale. Their palms clashed, but the strength of his palm strike completely crumbled, yet the power of his opponent seemed to be completely unaffected. What justice was in that? Just how wide did the gap of power have to be between them to lead to such a situation? Pung! He had not finished the thought when he was already sent flying by a palm strike, passing out directly. Tui! The woman from before walked over and spat at him. Only then did she strode off. Ling Han didn't even bother to look. The Empress was capable of being a king tier even in the second severance, so what was there to be shocked about her managing to toss over such trash? He directed a smile at the middle-aged man, and said, "Just help me out here." The middle-aged man was already dumbfounded. He was also a first severance, and naturally knew that Ning Hao was not artificially strong, and his strength was considerably powerful. But even so, he had still been directly struck like an idiot by a single palm strike. He hurriedly changed his attitude, and said, "3 guests, this way please." They should not have been lying, and had indeed come out of the Severing Mundane pool. Otherwise, if they hadn't advanced into Severing Mundane tier there, how could their strength possibly be this strong? Ling Han nodded at him, and the 3 of them walked through the stone doors together. Suddenly, the scene in front of their eyes immediately changed. They had entered into a colossal space, which contained mountains and water bodies, just like a small world. Merely with a few looks, Ling Han was sure that this definitely was a spatial god tool that had been directly refined based on a small world. So rich. 3 guests, this way please. Someone was waiting for them respectfully inside, and seeing Ling Han and his group appear, immediately extended his hand to show them the way in. Ling Han and his group followed behind him. Very soon, another person took that man's place, continuing to receive the guests that entered. This really was a small world. The power of regulation was too weak, and though the people that were guiding them in were only in the Genesis tier, they could travel a few million miles in a single step. In just 2 or 3 steps, they were already led to the front of a dazzling palace. 3 guests, the banquet will be held in the palace, so please go on ahead on your own. The person turned back. He still had to continue his work to guide new guests. Ling Han was just about to walk forwards when he suddenly took a sniff, and turned towards a row of courtyards at the side of the palace instead. Chapter 1742, Assisting in Pill Concoction. What drew Ling Han over was a herbal aroma. As the Alchemy Emperor, he might not be considered an elite of alchemy at this moment, but was definitely at the level of a prodigy. He could detect the slightest smell, and be able to track it down. This was a celestial pill. At first, he had only come here to have some food and drinks. Ling Han himself did not have much interest, but there was actually someone concocting a pill in this place, and this garnered his curiosity, and he wanted to meet the person who was concocting a pill. Now that he had advanced into the Severing Mundane tier, he was qualified to refine celestial pills. The Empress was proud, and thought that all beings in this world should become subjects for herself and Ling Han. Even if they did not offer their allegiance now, they would do so in future. Thus, she naturally was completely unconcerned that Ling Han would be barging around carelessly like this. In her eyes, this was only to be expected. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was slightly anxious, though. After all, this was the territory of the Fu clan, and who knew how many elites were hidden here in this small world. Ling Han pushed open all the doors he came across and entered. This courtyard was extremely quiet, so peaceful that there weren't even any patrolling teams. But true, this was a spatial god tool in the first place. Usually, no one would be entering at all, so what need was there to deliberately assign guards? And at present, everyone was heading towards that palace. Who would become interested in this completely unremarkable courtyard? Finally, Ling Han arrived at a massive room. It was very spacious, and there was a cauldron right in its center. The cauldron was 30 meters tall, and it did not look like a cauldron at all, but rather a tower. Underneath the cauldron, flames blazed. An elder was presently circling continuously around the cauldron. For every circle he made, he would deliver a palm strike. The regulation of fire surged, and the cauldron would also react, multiple patterns appearing. This elder ignored Ling Han and his group completely. His figure circled around quickly like a ghost. Ling Han frowned, and exclaimed, "Oh no, it's going to be ruined." When his words fell, the elder's steps also slowed, and there were beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. The whole cauldron was also shaking slightly as if it was about to explode. "Hurry and give me a hand," the elder immediately called out. How was he supposed to help? Though Ling Han was a prodigy of alchemy, he had never concocted a celestial pill before, so how was he to know how a celestial pill should be concocted? However, being able to lay claim to the name of Alchemy Emperor, Ling Han naturally was no fake. It was all right even if he did not know how to go about refining a celestial pill. He only had to understand the movements of that elder. In the end, pill refinement meant the grasp and control one had over flames. Of course, pharmacology was also very important, but at present, it had no relation to Ling Han. The changes of the cauldron's fire would determine whether the pill would explode or otherwise. At present, it was the problem of a possibility of the cauldron exploding, and thus this was something that Ling Han could handle. After only taking a few looks, he immediately moved. Pa, pa, pa. He continued to strike the cauldron endlessly, the 9 heavens flames surging. This was the source of his confidence in daring to make a move. At the beginning, his movements were slightly hesitant, but he immediately became proficient. Every single move showed his knowledge of the fundamentals. This was the comprehension ability of the Alchemy Emperor. Of course, he presently could only follow the elder's movements. If the elder was not leading the way in front of him, he definitely would not be able to follow up. The elder was very busy. Not only did he have to adjust the temperature of the flame, he had to weave together the medicinal traits of the ingredients at the same time. If he was all by himself, he would really be slightly strained. However, with Ling Han's help now in controlling the temperature of the flames, he would be able to split out a portion of his concentration to suit those medicinal ingredients that were about to turn violent. Both of them, young and old, were focused, and the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden waited on the sidelines quietly. They only had to see Ling Han's completely concentrated expression, and they would not have the slightest feeling of impatience. And in this process, half a day's time had passed. Pa, pa, pa. The elder struck 72 times successively, and a whirring tremor was immediately emitted from the cauldron. The cauldron's flames extinguished in an instant. Ha ha ha. The elder laughed loudly, his beard shaking. 3 billion years, 3 billion years, and I have finally refined the winds and fire's 9 clouds pill successfully. Old geezer Situ, I have finally surpassed you this time. Let's see what else you have to say, just obediently bow your head in submission in front of me. He laughed for a while, and then turned towards Ling Han. His expression involuntarily became strange. Who are you? Ling Han was amused, and said, You don't even know who I am, and you dared to have me help you? The elder suddenly gaped, and looked completely astonished. I thought you were a helper that girl sent over, could it be that you're not? What girl? Ling Han shook his head. I'm not. The elder scratched his head, but then laughed. This is a fortunate misunderstanding, I finally concocted the winds and fire's 9 clouds pill. Brat, you have no idea how difficult it is to concoct this pill. Let me explain it to you. This dilemma had troubled him for 3 billion years, and now that it had finally been resolved successfully, the elder was naturally extremely ecstatic. Tugging Ling Han's hand, and not caring whether he was interested or not, he began to blabber on and on. As it turned out, this was an ancient pill recipe. Because it was too old, it was not very complete. When he had gotten hold of it, he tried various methods to restore it. 500 million years ago, he had already confirmed this current pill recipe, but was not able to successfully concoct it before no matter what he tried. His name was Xiang Yan, and there was another person that was restoring this pill recipe alongside him, Situ Tang. Both of them were originally good friends, but because they had a difference of opinion regarding the restoration of this ancient pill recipe, they had a few arguments, and a grudge began to grow between them. They each went their separate ways, both hoping that they could succeed, then show off in front of the other person, and enjoy the pleasure of watching the other person yielding and admitting that they were wrong in front of them. It had to be admitted that this was very childish, but if they were not such weirdos, how could they possibly spend a few 100 million to a few billion years' time on alchemy? Xiang Yan was very excited. He actually explained every detail of the restored pill recipe to Ling Han. This kind of alchemical pill was used to heal injuries, and was very effective even for immortal palace tier elites. Thus, now that this pill recipe had been successfully restored, its significance was incredibly important. He would even be written down in history, and become a god to the innumerable alchemists in the future generations. And in this manner, Ling Han learnt a new pill recipe completely, and this was also his first celestial level pill recipe, which was incredibly valuable. Seeing Xiang Yan was still blabbing endlessly there, seeming like he was completely capable of boasting for the rest of his life, Ling Han hurriedly called a halt, and dragging the two women with him, left like he was fleeing from something. Though Xiang Yan chased him for a few steps, he immediately ran back happily. At present, this cauldron was his treasure, and he feared that if he left, the alchemical pill would be stolen. Ling Han and his group exited the courtyard, and turned towards that palace. At this moment, the banquet had already begun, and the sound of music could be heard. What was strange was that the actual banquet was not actually held within the palace. In fact, this could not be considered a banquet in the traditional sense of the word, because there weren't multiple tables which people gathered around. Instead, at least 100 tables were joined together to form a long line, and various dishes were laid out on top. The guests held plates, and they would help themselves to whatever food piqued their fancy. There were plates at the side of each table, and one would occasionally see attendants replenishing those dishes that had been emptied. This was quite interesting. Every single person held a plate. Some would be eating as they walked, and some would be gathered in small groups, conversing as they ate. At the side, there were musicians that were playing various musical instruments, and there were also beautiful women dancing elegantly. Ling Han said, "You guys find a place to wait, I'll go get us some food." Chapter 1743, Carrying Off the Whole Pot. The Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden both nodded. Ling Han, meanwhile, strode forwards, and arrived at the side of that long line of tables. He drew out a plate, and began filling it with food without reservations. Others would be eating a little and taking a little, but with a glutton like him, this clearly was not possible. He filled the plate completely with food, and then arranged it into a tall pile. With his strength, he naturally could ensure that the food would be piled up like a small hill without the slightest bit falling off. At the side, some people were watching him with disdain. "Just how long have you gone without food? Do you have to take so much food like this?" Ling Han naturally would not be concerned with them. In the circle of cultivators, prestige was not given to you by others, but was rather gained through fighting with your own fists. Whoever was not convinced, he only had to beat them into submission. "Brother Lu, look. What corner has this country bumpkin popped out of? He's acting as if others will be snatching food from him." A woman was watching him coldly, her expression filled with mockery. She wore a red dress, and was quite beautiful, definitely being qualified to be considered a beautiful woman. Her companion was a man with a wide build. He was also presently watching Ling Han with disdain, and he said, it should be his first time attending such an event. He must have never seen such high-grade food before, and so revealed his true nature. "What poor manners," the woman said with disdain. She was only a Genesis tier, but because she had partnered with a newly advanced Severing Mundane tier, she actually dared to treat a genuine Severing Mundane tier like Ling Han in such a disdainful manner. Ling Han ignored her. The dishes offered at this banquet were really quite high-grade foods. There was a considerable amount of Genesis tier-level demonic beast meat, as well as some level 19 and 20 saint fruits. Every single item would be worth a few star stones outside, which was still relatively expensive. Hi's eyes were sharp, and he chose all the good stuff, causing this couple that was behind him to almost die of fury because as long as they took food after Ling Han had had his pick, all the good stuff in the dish would be completely gone. At first, they were still very reserved and followed behind Ling Han, but after a small semicircle, their faces were completely dark. That was because the contents of Ling Han's plate were already 21 to 24 meters tall. He had taken all the high-grade food and fruits, and those left behind were all lower-grade stuff. The couple could do nothing, and could only cut in front of Ling Han. Otherwise, they really wouldn't be able to get anything good. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh secretly. He had done it on purpose. He was just planning to return to the two women, but saw an attendant walking over, carrying a small dish. And when he passed by, he could see that a great many people were staring at him. They all stood up, and followed him. Could it be that some high-grade stuff had been served again? Ling Han saw that he was heading right in his direction, and thus chose to stop and wait for him. He saw that the attendant had placed down a clay pot, which had not been opened yet, but strains of steam could clearly be seen rising from the slit between the pot and its lid, turning into multiple patterns of great Tao. "TSK, good stuff," the attendant announced. "Celestial Cloud's mother ginseng stewed with phoenix blood chicken. Please enjoy, esteemed guests." This was a celestial medicine matched with an immortal beast. Of course, the Celestial Cloud's mother ginseng was only a 1-star celestial medicine that was at the lowest tier, but for the first severance and second severance, it was indescribably nutritious. And the phoenix blood chicken should also only be in the Severing Mundane tier, but cooked together with the celestial medicine, the effects of both could be strengthened to a certain extent. No wonder this dish had gathered everyone's attention the moment it was taken out. Most likely, it had been announced that this dish would be there, and they had all been waiting. In this mere instant, a long line had formed behind Ling Han. Just how much chicken meat and ginseng could there be in this small clay pot? If they did not line up earlier, they wouldn't be able to drink even a little soup. That couple that had previously mocked Ling Han were also very close, and so lined up behind Ling Han, just waiting for him to leave so they could feast to their heart's content. Ling Han naturally would not be reserved. He stretched out his hands, and directly picked up this clay pot. Then, he walked off just like that. Walked off, walked off, walked off. Stop right there. That couple bared their fangs at him. You are really not the slightest bit reserved. That is a whole pot of soup that contained a celestial medicine and immortal beast meat, and you actually carried off the whole pot? What is it? Ling Han turned back around, his face bearing an amiable smile. If the large black dog was here, its eyes would definitely turn around, and it would say, "Little Han, you are up to mischief again." "Put down the pot," they exclaimed harshly. Though they did not want to create trouble in such a high-grade banquet either, Ling Han was really too tasteless. Was there anyone that would do the same thing you did, leaving others cold and hungry? In this great banquet, all the other foods added together would not match 1/10 of the value of this single soup. They had waited for who knew how long. Did you think that they had been circling around the tables all this while because they could refill their plates easily after they had finished eating? Wrong, they had all been waiting for this dish to be served. They were only too embarrassed to be too obvious, and feared that others would laugh at them. But now, Ling Han was actually carrying off the whole pot of celestial soup, so they naturally did not want their pride anymore. Why? Ling Han's expression was completely innocent. "You can't carry off the whole pot of soup on your own," that couple called out, and those lining up behind them nodded quickly as well. "You couldn't do that. Isn't it just a pot of soup? Could it be that you all haven't drunk soup before? Why are you all so frantic like this? Ling Han asked, putting on a pretense of surprise. Just a pot of soup. Was this any ordinary soup? It was made from a celestial medicine cooked with the meat of an immortal beast, and was incredibly valuable. Those from one-star forces would not have a chance of tasting such high-grade food at all, and even such prodigies from two-star forces like Chang Sun Liang, Xiao Sheng, and the others would only have the chance to drink a mouthful when they attended such major events like the birthday celebrations of their grand elders. They naturally were frantic. Put down the pot, the red-attired woman shrieked, her expression completely twisted. She longed to drink a few more mouthfuls of soup made from a celestial medicine and meat of an immortal beast. It would allow her to gain the chance of breaking through into the severing mundane tier. For cultivators, this was a temptation that could not be refused, and was also their greatest life goal. Ling Han grinned, and said, "Sure, if you guys can take it, then just go ahead." He indeed put the pot down, but did not walk away. The couple immediately walked over, and stretched out a hand to lift the pot's lid. But their hands had just touched the lid, and they shouted in pain. They hurriedly let go, and took a few steps back. When they looked at their raised hands, the hands that they had stretched out were already as swollen as a pig's trotter, the surface of the skin having turned red. What's going on? The people who were at the back were uncertain of the situation, and all felt curious. Some had already become guarded, not daring to act rashly. Others, seeing that couple had stepped out of the way, all rushed forwards. It would be great if they made it there sooner, and gained a few extra mouthfuls of soup. However, whoever touched the lid of the pot would come off worse. Some had learned their lesson, and used something else to grip onto the pot's lid, but they were still scalded badly. There was not a single person that managed to take off the pot's lid, what more drink some soup. After a dozen or so people, everyone looked at Ling Han with amazed, uncertain eyes. They could all guess that this was Ling Han's doing, but no one could say clearly what exactly he had done. They had all gained a healthy respect, and some had already guessed that Ling Han's strength might be extremely frightening, so they did not dare make any more attempts and turned around and left. Ling Han chuckled, and picked up the pot again. He withdrew the 9 heavens flame, and began to search for the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. As he swept his gaze over the surroundings, he spotted the Empress and the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden. However, they were presently surrounded by over a dozen men, and looking at the expressions of those men, they should all be wooing the 2 women at present. This was not unusual. The Empress did not even need to show her true face, merely that perfect figure and captivating bearing was enough to make any man fall for her. And now that she had advanced into the severing mundane tier, who did not want to possess such a partner? Brother, how are you going to court women like this? When Ling Han came closer, a man immediately pulled him over, pointing at the food that was piled up like a small hill in his hands. Chapter 1744. Women should be courted like this. Ling Han turned to see a young man dressed in black tight-fitting outfit. He smiled, and asked, "Oh, then how should women be courted? In short, you definitely can't do it like this. What beautiful woman would like a glutton?" The young man in black scoffed. Ling Han felt mischievous, and asked, "How should I address you, my friend?" "Splendid distant city, Ku-ing," the young man in black replied. Ling Han nodded, and said, "Ku-zi, let us make a wager, shall we?" Ku-zi. Ku-ying's whole face was dark. "Your skill at inventing nicknames is really too poor. Furthermore, since it is so poor, how can you simply blurt it out like that?" Instantly, he was displeased, and retorted, "What wager? I am going to use this food to court those 2 women, and you will have to call me Big Brother in future," Ling Han said, grinning. Ku-ing humphed, and replied, "Fine, but if you can't, then I won't call you Ku-zi, I'll call you Ku-tu instead," Ling Han quipped. "Fuck you." Ku-ing did not know what was up either. In just a few moments, his anger was spiked with Ling Han's words. He darkly retorted, "If you can't, then you will have to call me Lord Ku in future." Some people nearby heard their wager, and involuntarily became excited as well. They all exclaimed, "Count me in too." Young people were fond of playing around, after all. Furthermore, this wager was clearly a sure win. These two women, especially that veiled woman, had a perfect figure, and her demeanor was so noble that others did not dare approach. How could they possibly be gluttons? Even if they were, everyone could take the food here. If you managed to court them with such a simple means, what justice would there be left in this world? Too bad, no one noticed that Ling Han had actually come in together with the two women. If they had witnessed this scene, then it was definite that no one would have dared make such a wager. "Hey, let's be clear first, we're talking about those two women," someone immediately added. Since one of the two women was a Genesis tier, then a severing mundane tier only had to crook a finger, and the possibility that she would throw herself into his arms was too high. There was no lack of materialistic women that wanted to form connections above their station in this world. Right, it is either that veiled woman, or courting the two of them together, the others egged him on. Ling Han deliberately frowned, and said, "Can the difficulty level not be so high? I am still a rookie. It has to be." Everyone was excited now. This banquet was only about eating and drinking, and it felt very boring. "Fine then." Ling Han nodded reluctantly. He pushed aside those men that were still making pointless efforts ahead of him, and asked, "Two beautiful women, do you want to have some immortal beast meat?" "Sure," the two women replied, all smiles. Fuck, what was going on here? Were these two beauties both gluttons? Why did their expressions change immediately upon hearing of food? Just now, they kept up a cool, aloof attitude towards whoever wanted to strike up a conversation with them. If they weren't gluttons, why would they switch their attitudes so drastically and so quickly? "If you want to eat, there is a condition," Ling Han said slowly. "What condition?" The two women naturally cooperated. "You have to give me a kiss." "All right." The two women approached, each planting a kiss on either side of Ling Han's cheeks. Those watching from the side were all dumbfounded. So as it turned out, courting women was actually so easy. Ling Han opened the claypot. This was a celestial soup, and it would really help too much to increase their present cultivation level. He took out bowls, and filled one for each woman. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden could only drink the soup. She had yet to advance into the severing mundane tier, so if she directly consumed the meat and the celestial medicine, the possibility of her exploding from being overnourished was higher. The Empress also required nutrition indeed. Previously, when she had advanced into the severing mundane tier, she had expended quite a few doppelgangers. Though she could reform them, it was very taxing for her, and this pot of soup was really timely help. At first, Ling Han would not have gone so far, but his wife was most important to him, so he naturally could not be reserved. Ling Han turned back around, and directed a smile at the others, declaring, "Call me Big Brother." Big Brother. The others were all convinced. Then, they quickly turned around and ran. They, too, wanted to get some celestial soup, and come back to court these two women. Ling Han laughed loudly, while the heavenly phoenix divine maiden shook her head. This husband of hers was really like a child sometimes, rendering others completely speechless. The Empress, though, was completely unconcerned. As long as Ling Han liked it, she was in full support. However, because Ling Han had carried off the whole pot of soup, a great many people had expressed their complaints to Fu Xiaoyun. In the end, Fu Xiaoyun had no choice but to command that another pot be cooked. After all, this banquet was for the purpose of recruiting new members. How could they expect the horse to run on an empty stomach? When the second pot of celestial soup was taken out, multiple people all bore twisted expressions, immediately coming to blows. Those had all been tricked by Ling Han, thinking that carrying a pot of celestial soup over would allow them to court an exquisite beauty the likes of the Empress. For the sake of the Empress, they naturally would give it their all. These were all young people, and were very quick-tempered. Soon enough, their true anger was spiked. Pang, pang, pang. Immediately, it became complete chaos. Wives, just look. Ling Han first pulled the two women to one side. Then, he covered his face, and charged into the battle royale. In a moment, he had come back out, his hands holding a clay pot. What was it if not the celestial soup? He and the Empress both dined delectably. Meanwhile, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden could not eat it anymore. She was already at the peak stage of the Genesis tier in the first place, and if she could not advance into the severing mundane tier, she could only endlessly increase the number of her stars. The great battle persisted for a very long time, and it was Bei Xianming who interfered personally. Only then were the masses suppressed. A second Severance King tier was naturally awesome. His expression was dark, and he shouted questions at the crowd. To actually dare begin a gang fight in the Fu clan's great banquet, were they tired of living? Someone discovered that the celestial soup had disappeared, and immediately shrieked, "Where's the soup?" When everyone saw this, they all moaned in despair. They had become a complete mess, and wasn't it just for the sake of that pot of celestial soup? Now, it had actually disappeared without a trace. How could they not grieve like this? Ling Han drank the soup happily, and did not feel the slightest bit of guilt. "Husband, it seems like everywhere you go, there is no place that can remain peaceful, and people definitely would end up in a tizzy," the heavenly phoenix divine maiden assessed. Ling Han thought for a moment, that was indeed the case. None of the mystery realms he entered were ordinary. Just look, he had discovered the body of a celestial king even in the severing mundane pool, and also obtained the source water or heaven and earth and a core secret technique of a celestial king. And when he went to Dark Moon City after he had entered the celestial realm, the ancestral shrine of the Ding clan was torn apart. When he went to Black Moon City, the Shao clan ended up fuming with rage. Strange, he had never thought of going to create trouble, but it just happened that everything would occur around him. With his personality, he was not one that was willing to suffer silently either, so a small issue would slowly and eventually grow to become a big matter. On the other side, Bei Xianming was again rebuking with a few strict words. Fu Xiaoyun stepped out and said, "Next, there is a small test. Those who successfully pass the test may join the Fu clan, and our Fu clan also has an agreement with the Return to Origin Palace to nominate promising candidates to join this 4-star force." She paused. True enough, she saw that everyone's eyes had lit up. Only then did she continue, "I hope that everyone can grasp this opportunity." The masses were excited. Putting aside Return to Origin Palace, merely being able to enter the Fu clan was a supreme honor. For a mere first severance, a 3-star force would be akin to the bright moon in the skies, something so far off that it could not be reached. "Dare I ask, Fairy Fu, what is this test like?" Chapter 1745, Take a Saber Attack from Me. Later, we will head to a forest, and what everyone has to do is actually very simple. In 10 days' time, pass over the mountains, and reach the other side, Fu Xiaoyun said. Her description sounded very simple, but everyone looked grave. If it was so easy to join the Fu clan, then would it still be considered a 3-star force? But Fu Xiaoyun was only willing to say so much at this point, and they could not force her to answer their questions either. They could only keep their doubts in their hearts. In any case, they would find out when they arrived at the destination. Everyone left the area of the palace, and headed all the way north. The power of regulation in a small world was really too weak. The spatial barrier seemed to be non-existent. In only a few steps, they had already traversed many mountains and rivers. Ahead of them was a mountain as tall as 30,000 meters, and its length was in tens of thousands of meters. But wasn't this kind of tall mountain just the issue of a single step for a first severance elite? Everyone, please take this piece of paper. When you all arrive at the summit later, you have to ask a person there to place a stamp on your paper, Fu Xiaoyun said. If the person has arrived without a stamp, then it cannot be considered as having passed the test. Everyone exchanged looks. Could it be that the difficulty lay in obtaining this stamp? Fu Xiaoyun continued, everyone, the path of cultivation is cruel. Everyone should first take their own measures to avoid losing their life in this place. Hearing these words, everyone's expressions finally changed. There was actually a possibility of losing one's life in this small test. Those who do not want to take the risk do not have to participate in the test, but those who ascend the mountain are responsible for their own lives, Fu Xiaoyun stated calmly. If there's no other question, then let's begin. Only after a slight hesitation did a great many people charge out. Wasn't the life of a cultivator all about fighting with the heaven and earth and with others? If they took this gamble, there was a chance they could join the Fu clan. Then, their future would be bright. Otherwise, if they remained in a one-star force, so what if they could live for a few hundreds of billions of years? In the end, they would not be able to survive the immortals' tribulation, and would still be killed sooner or later. Everyone ran out, while the companions that those severing mundane tier elites had brought stayed behind. Ling Han drew the heavenly phoenix divine maiden into the Black Tower, and then slowly ascended the mountain with the Empress. Fu Xiaoyun said that they only needed a stamp, and then head to the other side of the mountain. There was no rule that said that they had to definitely get the top few positions. Thus, the two of them naturally had no need to rush the journey. When they had taken a few steps, they couldn't help but be slightly surprised, because the suppression over their speed was overwhelming. Usually, this was refined based on a small world, and the power of regulation was too weak here, so it was completely impossible to bind a severing mundane tier. But on this mountain, it was completely different. In fact, the power of regulation here was even stronger than in the celestial realm, causing their speed to drop to the extent of being 100 times faster than an ordinary person, at most. To a first severance elite, this was overwhelmingly slow. What powerful gravity! Moreover, the air is also very sticky and filled with some substance, being like a swamp, which further restricts speed, Ling Han analyzed. However, if he used the lightning flash, he could attain a burst of rapid speed. The Empress nodded, but was not afraid at all. The Fu clan had set this kind of test to recruit talented people, not to kill them. Thus, this test had to be something that a flawless severance could pass, but both Ling Han and the Empress had advanced into the severing mundane tier successfully through striking the heaven and earth, so their first severance was capable of crushing even second severance, so wasn't passing this test something very simple for them? As the two of them continued walking, they discussed the art of cultivation. Ling Han taught the secret technique of the multitude beasts celestial king to the Empress. He was very expectant. If every single doppelganger of the Empress could produce 10 battle beasts, then when the Empress exchanged blows with others in future, she could summon her 9 doppelgangers and 100 battle beasts. This lineup was slightly frightening. Both of them were prodigies of cultivation. Though a celestial king technique was incredibly difficult to grasp and understand, as they discussed, they still picked out a single thread out of this whole mess, and gained some ideas. They both had a slight understanding, but compared with the true celestial king technique, this was only the tip of the iceberg. Halt! They were just talking when they saw a person suddenly appear in front of them. Dressed in a tight-fitting outfit, he appeared to be a guard, wielding a saber in his hand. If you wish to advance, you must take a saber strike from me. Ling Han asked, then what if we can't take it? Then everything will be up to fate. This man paused, and continued, I will try my best to hold my punches, and not kill the two of you. Oh, no wonder Fu Xiaoyun had added a word of advice. So this was what was going on here. Ling Han broke into a grin, and asked, can I take the offensive instead? The man paused, then laughed loudly, and said, you are the 7th person to ask me this question. Not bad, not bad. Very smart. You can take the offensive, but if you took the offensive, your defenses would be greatly decreased when I strike. The possibility of being able to take this saber strike from me would be even smaller then. You are a second severance, right? Ling Han suddenly asked. The man did not feel that it was strange that he was seen through, and said, "That's right, I am a second severance. However, you do not have to worry. I will not use my full strength, and will limit my strength to the level of first severance. As long as you are an ordinary severance, you will at least be able to retreat safely under this saber strike of mine." Ling Han smiled, and said, "I am not worried, but you had best worry a bit." "Worry about what?" the man asked curiously. The Empress suddenly moved, and shot out a palm strike at the man. Boom, suns, moons, and stars appeared in the palm of her hand, with multiple streaks of great Tao appearing, and the power of regulation rippling, like the descent of a supreme empress. The man paled in shock. Instinctively, he was about to brandish his saber in a parry, but a hint of hesitation immediately appeared in his expression. He was afraid that if attack clashed with attack, he would die. This strike was extremely devastating. After only an instant of hesitation, he gave up the idea of parrying. Instead, he held his saber over his chest, and activated it fully. He wanted to first block this attack, and then take advantage of the opening for a counterattack. Pung! The Empress's palm strike landed onto the blade of the saber, and a clear palm print actually appeared on the blade. An irresistible force rolled over, and the man retreated continuously. His face had become pallid, and then became completely red. Then, he began to throw up blood like mad. "Worry about this." Ling Han finally finished his words. Though that man was a second severance, he was only a minor guard of the Fu clan, so how could he possibly be a king tier? And the Empress's battle prowess could rule even in the second severance, and only the likes of Bei Xianming could possibly be a match for her. This man was still a long way off from that. He was defeated with a single move. The man looked at the Empress with eyes full of disbelief. Who could believe that a first severance was actually capable of defeating a second severance so easily? If it was not for the fact that he was personally involved, he would completely treat it as a joke that was not funny at all should he hear it from others. Ling Han chuckled, and said, "It's my turn now, right?" The man forcibly stood back up. Though it was already a complete mess inside his chest, he suppressed his injury. He was sure that with his cultivation level as a second severance, he was capable of completing the test for a first severance even with severe injuries. "My husband is stronger than I am." The Empress suddenly spoke up. These words were spoken with a very even tone, having completely no intention of showing off. She was only stating a very ordinary fact. Meanwhile, the man shivered from the scare. With a ding, the saber in his hand fell onto the floor. He had no wish to die at such a young age. Chapter 1746. Who is the one being tested? Ling Han and the Empress easily passed the first test, and that saber-wielding man's legs were still shaking behind them. How could there be such a freakish couple? He was a second severance here, and a second severance Grand Elder was actually so scared by a first severance junior that he dropped his saber. This was proof of just how frightening this couple was. He had best never see them ever again. Ling Han and the Empress continued to discuss the 10 beasts technique of the multitude beast celestial king. Ling Han did not obtain the complete celestial technique, but there was nothing lacking in the core secret of the technique, and only the core part of forming 10 battle beasts was good enough for them to consider it to be of value. Who among them had not cultivated a celestial king technique? The two of them sipped reincarnation tea as they continued their discussion, and when they felt an urge, they would even spar a bit. They were completely unconcerned what speed they were walking at. However, half a day later, they had finally arrived at the second testing area. There was a large number of people gathered here, but they were actually not fighting, but rather playing chess. The game of Go. Ling Han only swept an eye over the board, and discovered that this was not ordinary Go. The black and white pieces seemed to have a life of their own, all exuding a boundless killing intent. As each move was made and each piece was consumed, the killing intent would wash out. Those who had weak willpower would even break down if they watched this game. One side of the clash was a young man, probably a first severance prodigy that had risen above the masses this time, and the other side was an elder dressed in long gray robes. The latter's face was covered with wrinkles, and his hair was completely white. But this elder was a second severance. Ling Han was slightly surprised. He had initially thought that this spatial god tool was only Fu Xiaoyan's temporary residence, but from the looks of things now, that wasn't the case. If it was only a temporary residence, how could there possibly be a celestial-level alchemist and at least 2 second severance elites? Fu Xiaoyan had probably deliberately brought it along with her to allow her to easily recruit people like them. Otherwise, if it was any other time, this kind of spatial god tool would definitely be stored in the Fu clan manor. Putting all else aside, merely the winds and fires 9 clouds pill that Xiang Yan had refined was enough to make even immortal palace tier grade elites come to blows for its sake. Pooh! Just at this moment, that young man that was playing suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, his expression becoming very spiritless. Yet he still asked the elder, "How long did I manage?" 15 minutes, the gray-robed elder stated calmly. He shook his head. Too bad, you did not pass. Ling Han made some inquiries, and found out that they were required to play against this elder. If they could hold on for 30 minutes, they would pass the test, but if they were unable to, they could only go back the way they came. Who's next? The gray-robed elder swept an eye over the crowd. Some people immediately shook their heads. There was no specific rule that said that they definitely had to walk this path. They could take any other path up the mountain. They only had to obtain a stamp, and reach the other side of the mountain. The gray-robed elder did not stop them, but a cold smirk curled his lips. These people naturally would not know that if they passed each test, they would not face any fatal danger even if they failed, but if they diverted from the main path, it would be incredibly dangerous. Putting aside first severance, even second severance, third severance, and fourth severance could possibly die here. He was not going to reveal the truth, and would only watch coldly from the sidelines. More and more people left. They had already watched a considerable number of people play against the elder, and they had all failed to last a full 30 minutes in the game. Spitting out blood and sustaining injuries, their condition was very serious. Ling Han flopped down, and said, "Uncle, I'll play a game with you." The gray-robed elder slipped all the pieces on the board into the chess case with a flutter of his robes. He said, "You'll take black and move first." Ling Han was not reserved. He took a random black piece, and placed it on the board. The elder naturally could only use the white pieces, and quickly made his move as well. After a few times, Ling Han's moves were still very quick, but the elder was becoming slower and slower. This was not an ordinary game of Go. Instead, the chessboard was akin to a battlefield, and the chess pieces were soldiers, and a different kind of war was being conducted here. They were competing with their divine sense, as well as their grasp over regulations. A first severance naturally could not match a second severance. Thus, the elder placed a time limit of 30 minutes, and anyone who could last the full 30 minutes would be considered as having passed the test. But Ling Han was no ordinary first severance. In terms of grasp of regulations, he possessed the 2 deadly weapons, the 9 heavens flame and the Xianin source water. How could they be anything that a second severance could defend against? With the chess pieces as the medium, the 9 heavens flame and the Xianin source water launched a frightening offensive against the gray-robed elder. How could he block this attack? The elder naturally could only retreat continuously, his moves completely out of order. Very soon, Ling Han's chess pieces consumed his pieces one after another. Not even 15 minutes had passed, and the elder could only abandon the game and forfeit. He looked at Ling Han in shock. Who was the one being tested here? As an examiner, he actually lost to a candidate. Furthermore, it was a horrible, crushing defeat. He did not dare believe it. "You have passed," the elder said miserably. He was very proud of his skill in chess, and had thus come up with this method as a test. He had never thought that he would take such a great fall here. Ling Han walked onwards, holding the Empress's hand. The elder initially wanted to stop him. This was not adhering to the rules, but when he recalled how he had lost at Ling Han's hands, how could he bring himself to speak up? He had just raised his hand, and then immediately lowered it. The others were all unconvinced, and raised their objections. If you people are able to defeat me, you can also bring someone with you. You can even bring a few people, the gray-robed elder said, immediately overriding everyone's objections. Ling Han and the Empress were still slowly and leisurely ascending the mountain. Another half a day later, they were already very close to the summit, and the third test appeared in front of them. There was still a large group of people gathered here. When they came close enough, they found out that this third test was not a test of battle prowess or a test of one's grasp of regulations. Instead, you were given a piece of paper. An incomplete seal was written on it, and you had to complete the seal as best as you could. This was very difficult. For the majority of cultivators, including many young king tiers, their comprehension ability was high and battle prowess was strong, but they had all been following in the footsteps of their predecessors from start to finish. Thus, it was extremely difficult to ask them to fill in the blanks for an incomplete seal. Ling Han saw that both Ma Ying and Song Ji were trapped here. The two of them were racking their brains, neither daring to rashly return the piece of paper in their hands. There was only one chance. If they were overly wrong, they would lose the chance to continue onwards. Of course, you could also take a separate path, but that would be extremely dangerous. If you could manage to make your way to the mountain summit even like this, then the Fu clan would also be willing to recruit you just for the sake of your battle prowess and good luck. Ling Han and the Empress walked over, each taking a piece of paper as well. There was a seal written on it, and there were a few crucial points that had been left blank, and they were required to fill it in. There was similarly a second severance elite seated here, and he was more than enough to suppress first severances like themselves. Brat! A furious shout rang out, and an elder leaped over, the glare he directed at Ling Han filled with killing intent. This was that first severance grand elder of the Qi clan now. He had naturally advanced into the second severance. Previously, in the severing Mundane pool, they had wanted to forcibly snatch Ling Han's wooden raft, but two of their group had instead been killed by Ling Han's hand. When they severed the Mundane, the third junior of the Qi clan had also died because he had failed, and only he managed to deliver the second strike, advancing into the second severance. Originally, this banquet was meant for first severance elites, but it had not been clearly stated previously. Any person who successfully advanced into the severing Mundane tier in the severing Mundane pool could come. Thus, the elder of the Qi clan took advantage of this loophole. He was a second severance, and had naturally passed the last two stages easily. However, the third stage was not related to strength, which stumped him. Now that he had spotted Ling Han, his eyes immediately turned bloodshot, his killing intent blazing. Chapter 1747, Not Down to Earth. Ling Han glanced at him, smiled, and asked, "You are?" The Qi clan elite was shaking with fury. "You have already killed two of our clansmen, and you actually dare to ask who I am?" He harshly retorted, "Let's see where you can run to this time." He then made a brazen move. There was no rule here that stated fighting was disallowed, and in a battle of a second severance against a first severance, this was absolute domination. The Fu clan elite that was overseer here had initially wanted to interfere, but after some thought, the behind that he had just raised sunk back down. Rules would be rules. Ling Han chuckled, and said, "Old geezer, you wanted to take my wooden raft forcefully just because your cultivation level was higher than mine, and had thus caused the deaths of your own clansmen. Instead of reflecting on your own actions, you push all the blame onto others. Don't you think that is shameful of you? Die." When the Qi clan elite moved, he was slightly careful. He naturally feared angering the Fu clan. That would be a devastating calamity to a mere Qi clan. However, when he saw that the elite who was overseer here had no intention to stop him, his intense hatred suddenly rose. Boom, the speed of his move instantly quickened tenfold, and it descended down on Ling Han. Those standing on the sidelines all jumped aside, fearing that they would be dragged into the matter. This was a second severance elite. Pa! Ling Han raised his hand and lowered it, firmly delivering a slap to that Qi clan elite. He had used so much force that the latter spun a good few times on the spot. When they saw this, everyone was practically gaping with their mouths wide open. Had their sight blurred? It was Ling Han who was the second severance, and the Qi clan elite was only a first severance? Or it was the Qi clan elite that had slapped Ling Han. But they looked closer, and the end result had not changed in the slightest. The Qi clan elite had just barely steadied his footing, his left cheek very swollen, and his eyes filled with little stars of disbelief. He had actually been slapped. By a mere first severance junior. How was this possible? When they were in the severing Mundane pool, he had absolutely dominated over Ling Han, forcing the latter to have no choice but to flee pathetically, and though the latter had advanced into the severing Mundane now, he, too, had successfully advanced into the second severance, so he should still be dominating him. He did not dare believe this, he could not. You're not awake yet? Pa! Ling Han delivered another slap, which landed on the other cheek of the Qi clan elite, causing him to spin around again. Putting aside the fact that the Qi clan elite had just advanced into the second severance, even if he had reached the peak stage of the second severance, faced with Ling Han, he would still be easily suppressed. Everyone was completely dumbfounded by the scene, thinking that what the elders said about how a second severance would absolutely crush a first severance was all lies. Looking at this scene was a loud slap right into their faces. I will kill you, the Qi clan elite roared loudly. Boom, he ignited his life force. A boundless golden light surged out from within his body, turning into multiple golden blades. It was as if he had become a porcupine. He pounced at Ling Han. The golden swords shot forwards, the power directly approaching the peak stage of the second severance. Igniting one's life force was an action of putting one's life on the line. If life force was damaged, then not only would one's cultivation level have no hope of advancing further, his battle prowess would also drop drastically. Those severing Mundane tier Grand Elders would not die because of this. How could they survive the immortal's tribulation in future? However, life force could still be restored through the use of celestial medicine. The Qi clan elite only had one thought in mind now, and that was to kill Ling Han. Otherwise, how would he be able to face others in future? Ling Han's look became sinister. Previously, the Qi clan had attempted to snatch his wooden raft from him in the severing Mundane pool. Though he had killed 2 of them, he had still been forced to flee in the end. He had not sought this old geezer for an accounting yet, and the latter had delivered himself right up to his doorstep. Whom was he going to kill if not him? Ling Han swiped his palm to one side, and slashed out like the blade of a sword. Pooh! The Qi clan elite was immediately sliced in half by a flash of sword Qi. Blood sprayed out, and his spirit was not spared either. It had been forcibly sliced into 2. However, the vitality of a second severance elite was really tenacious. The 2 halves of the miniature human that the spirit had taken form of still wanted to merge back into one. Unfortunately, Ling Han had used the regulations of the 9 heavens flame and the Xianin source water in this strike. A spirit that had been sliced in 2 actually wanted to survive the hit? There was absolutely no way. The 2 halves of the spirit struggled for a while, but could only be destroyed. A vast vitality and life energy returned to the heaven and earth, but because this was an enclosed space, it suddenly caused the surrounding plants to grow like mad. Everyone was looking at Ling Han dumbly as if they were watching a monster. Even that Fu clan elite looked constipated because even in a 3-star force like the Fu clan, severing Mundane tier elites would not easily die, either. Celestial level elites were really hard to kill. But right in front of him, a second severance elite had been slaughtered like a pig, causing him to shiver as well. It should be known that he, too, was only a second severance. This young man was clearly only in the first severance. How could he possibly be so strong? His expression filled with respect, he stood up, and said, "Sir, you can pass through." What a joke, how could he not receive such a prodigy with absolute respect? Ling Han proficiently searched out the spatial god tool from the body of the Qi clan elite. Then, he nodded at the Fu clan elite, and left with the Empress. This time, there weren't even any objections. Would they want to die? Song Ji's and Ma Ying's mouth was twitching. They both thought that they were prodigies, but when they saw Ling Han move, they suddenly realized just how far off they were from a real king tier. After this stage, there was no other person blocking the way. Ling Han and the Empress arrived at the summit. There was a person dressed in white here. He was very young, and sat in a cross-legged position on the ground. There was a table in front of him, on which lay a qin. He was presently strumming the strings lightly, producing a divine tinkling sound. Please listen to a song of dispersing celestial clouds from me, the white-robed person stated with a smile, showing 2 rows of snow-white teeth. His locks were ink black, each strand shimmering slightly. Before the song ends, you can pick up the stamp on the table and lay down a stamp. Otherwise, please return from whence you came. So there was a 4th test. Since someone wants to give us a performance, let's listen then, Ling Han said to the Empress. The Empress nodded, and lightly leaned into Ling Han's arms. The white-robed young man gritted his teeth at the scene. To actually act so lovey-dovey in front of him, were they bullying a lonely bachelor like him? He calmed his heart, and his hands suddenly moved. The sound of the qin immediately rang out. It was indescribably melodious, causing one to unconsciously be enraptured by the music. The young man was very proud. Actually, there was no 4th test. He had only come here to sit here on a spontaneous whim. He wanted to see if the so-called king tiers would be able to survive his song of dispersing celestial clouds. So far, only a bare 2 people had just barely passed his test, and it was because he had let them off easily at the last minute. Otherwise, not a single person would have passed. But he had just strummed a few strokes when he immediately looked shocked. That was because Ling Han's and the Empress's eyes were clear. Neither seemed to have been enraptured by the melody of the song. What strong force of will! Ling Han smiled and said, "The song is noble and solitary. You are not being down to earth. Just take a look at me." He drew out a few bowls, and upended them on the ground. Then, with his hands holding a chopstick each, he began to strike them continuously. There was no order to his movements at all, and they were extremely chaotic, yet like a demonic tune penetrated his brain and bones. The white-robed young man was actually affected unconsciously. The sound of his song immediately changed, completely brought out of tune with Ling Han's interference. Fuck, was this descending lotus flowers? Had he become one of the beggar tribe? You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.